financially viable if you live within Nelson.
Oh,
It's
okay,
really for
'cause-
external communities where the car share can't afford to have their own inventory.
Okay, but it is in the Kootenays.
It is in the Kootenays, yeah.
Okay,
that's-
yeah, like I'd never
was-
seen that before, the air share.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a really great program.
We are ready. So I'd like to call to order the special council meeting of Friday, February the 3rd. Apologies for starting a few minutes late. We were all scrambling to get a bit of lunch before we started. And calling to order, we would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Ktunaxa, the Syilx, and the Sinix peoples, and is home to the Métis and many diverse Aboriginal persons. We honor their connection to the land and rivers and respect the importance of the environment to our strength as a community. Councillors, are there any introduction of late items? Okay, seeing none. Item 4, adoption of the agenda as presented. And for those out in the public who might not have seen that there has been an addenda, we're going to have a little update on the Hall Street Pier under item 5. Could I have an adoption of the agenda, please? Moved by Councillor Payne, seconded by Councillor Lockenberg. All those in favor? All those opposed? And that carries. So moving on to item 5, we are looking at 5A, capital budget summary. So we're going to go back in and speak a little bit more about the capital budget. And we have with us our Chief Financial Officer, Chris Jury, and the Head of Public Works. I apologize. I know you have a new and different title, but you're still the Head of Public Works to me.
Introduce yourself to everyone.
Colin Innes. So I'm going to turn it over to the two gentlemen across from me, and it's all yours.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mayor and Council. So, a couple things, I guess. We're, of course, continuing on from where we left off last Friday. And I did mention that everything's a work in progress, and we'll go back and sharpen our pencils. And that's what we've kind of continually been doing over the past week. So I did send along with the February 3rd version of the capital budget a couple of changes that we had made. I don't know if you had a chance to look at that, but I'll just highlight those. One of them is looking at the Cottonwood Park piece and the paving that we were going to do there, and trying to see if it didn't make more sense to just try to roll it into our regular paving budget, and you know, if that would be more manageable as well, and just kind of have that whole, you know, once we have the crews out here doing the paving, just have that be part of that piece instead. And, you know, sometimes we can be ambitious on some of the work that we're trying to do, but if we kind of make that more manageable and just see like, okay, can we just have that be part of that? So we kind of reduced the budget for the Cottonwood Park enhancements and had that included in just our regular paving budget. We also looked at, you probably remember when Charlie Henderson was here talking about the laneway maintenance program that he wanted to start doing. We discussed having that as well, just be part of their regular transportation budget. Again, you know, there's only so many crews and time and things like that. So if they concentrate over the next few years on doing the laneways, that might make sense to just allocate some of the budget there. And the third kind of significant piece was looking at the storm work grant, and again, sort of being realistic on that and saying if we're going to focus our energies, if we do get that grant, on doing some of that storm enhancement, it's unlikely we're going to do additional storm work. I think all the focus will just be on those areas and trying to work within that grant. So what the net result is that in total, by the time we get to 2027, we have an additional 500,000 more in reserves at the end of 2027. You know, even just doing that little bit, 50 or 100,000 a year savings, you know, of course, by the end of 5 years adds up to a little bit more in reserve. So that's kind of where we're at right now. Yeah. And then just as far as schedule, like we mentioned, we're going to just talk a little bit more about the remaining capital and go through the reserves. And then we arranged to have Matt Stanley present at around 3 o'clock, although I believe he's available if we ended up, you know, finishing earlier. It doesn't matter. He's on call, I think. So he'd be able to come in and present sort of his vision for that he presented I don't know, a couple of years ago, I guess, on sort of the downtown and the pier and how that all kind of fits together in kind of the master plan there. I don't know if there's any questions on that before we.
Question from Councillor Payne.
So I just made a note to myself, on the paving.
Yes.
Thank you, I got that in the right spot. I'm looking where I would find the stormwater. So I'm on page 6. Is that one of those items listed under that?
Yeah, so if you look on, yes, page 6, the storm sewer upgrades.
Right,
We have a storm infrastructure upgrade project, grant-funded project, pretty significant, you can see in 2024.
okay.
That comes in 3.6 million, 3.2 million. We also had another budget line item, I think it was 47,000 a year
Yeah, I
to do
remember.
storm work. We're probably gonna focus just on that grant during that time. And once that's completed, we'll probably go back to kind of picking and choosing spots, but I think during those 3 years, all efforts will just be on getting that kind of work done, so.
And this is a grant that we aren't sure that we have received yet, and do we know the timing on that?
We, Councillor Payne, we had applied on it, I believe it was in June of last year, and I would anticipate that with the province's budget coming later this spring is when we'd hear about it, would be my
Okay.
assumption. And then, of course, there's a significant amount of work to be done there, and so I think that as our CFO Jury has indicated here, I would imagine that with all the work that needs to happen there, us doing additional storm work on top of that just really
Yep.
doesn't seem like that's something that would happen. I think that we would stay focused on these key areas here.
Okay, so that's why we're not seeing anything in the 2023 budget. It sort of moves out to give you time once we hear about the grant to see what needs to be done after that. Perfect, thank you.
Okay. I was trying to recall the areas that we did discuss. We went through information services. I think we were kind of touched on parks a little bit here, so maybe we'll kind of go back to parks, which is on page 3, and talk about a few elements here. We may have kind of sped through this piece, but I think we discussed the bear bin piece. I know we went through that and the wayfinding project when Sebastian was here, and he was able to sort of tell us some of the timing on those pieces. We talked about the pier, and we'll get a little bit of a presentation later this afternoon. One of the key pieces we'll have to think about and make a decision on is the canopies. And the way we have it in the budget now is to complete the pier, the base pier, in 2023, and then in 2024 look for the potential for some grants and maybe do that element of the canopies in 2024. So I mean, there's some pros and cons of both approaches. One approach would be to just get the whole thing wrapped up in 2023. It means that we're funding it entirely ourselves and there's no additional grant funds. There's also the potential and probably more the likelihood that as we extend and do the canopies, we couldn't have this completed by the summer. So if we just did the pier, we'd be able to have it available and open for the public likely for the summer. If we continue to do the canopies, that might not be the case. The other piece, of course, is once you disable crews and send them home and then have to bring them back again to do the canopies, there's a bit of inefficiencies there. So there's definitely some pros and cons of both. But of course, the potential to have some of this funded by additional grants is also a good option. So that's the way it's in the plan now. I'm not looking for any decisions, and of course we'll have Matt Stanley to talk a little bit more this afternoon, and just something to kind of set the stage for that. The other piece that's in here, bit of a placeholder, is I think it was maybe in the fall of last year, we had the Rotary group come and talk about a spray park at Rosemont Park. So I believe there were still some questions to be asked on that one as far as, water usage and different types of systems, some that circulate the water and some that just, one-time use of the water. So we're planning a presentation on that, I believe, in this month, right, February?
Later
Yeah.
February, hopefully.
I
haven't figured out.
Okay.
Okay.
At some point in
TBD.
the near future, yes. So we've got this in here as a placeholder funded through Rotary, but we'll have an opportunity to discuss that further and have them and Colin Innes here present prior to making any decisions on that. And it's not in the 2023 plan; it's for 2024, and it's all 100% funded through donations at this point. Cottonwood Park, I discussed a little bit about, we made some adjustments to that piece to have it rolled into the transportation budget for the paving part of that. Some of the initial groundwork and grading and removing of some of the old concrete and things like that are still in here. It's just the paving portion has been taken out and put into our paving budget. And then we have the Lakeside Park basketball courts. Yes, I believe we talked about that one at the last meeting as well. Yeah.
I have a question, sorry. I'm putting up my hand to acknowledge myself. It came up actually at the farmer's market meeting yesterday, and that is, we're talking about this paving, and nobody can answer the question. The paving that we're talking about at Cottonwood is, like, in my mind, it's on the, on the Cottonwood side, that makes no sense. But on the side that's behind the bottle depot. The question came up about whether or not there was any paving being contemplated for the Rod and Gun Club parking lot.
I can answer that. Not at this stage. I think
Okay.
when we brought this to council, we were originally looking at the Rod and Gun Club side, and then after really giving that thought, and it made more sense to finish the parking and create that parking at the bottle depot side and allow us to finish that park there. There's obviously the Rod and Gun Club is more complicated because there's that ramp going into Cottonwood Auto Body. The potential use of that site could be something different than just parking. So
Okay, perfect.
that's what we're doing.
There we go. We have the answer to that question, and there's, I know that Councillor Payne is on that committee, and I see Brenton Raby, who's also on that committee, so now a number of people that are on that committee have heard the answer to the question that we couldn't really answer.
Yeah, it's Woodward and Page.
Yeah, it's not me. I'd
Sorry,
love
sorry, I'm looking at him and saying Payne, so my apologies,
It's
Councillor
like-
Payne. Well, it's a good thing I didn't put you next door to each other. It could be really, like, if
That
I
would've
put all
been-
three of you peas on that one side, I'd really be in trouble, so.
Go elope and end up
Peas,
with one
peas in a,
neighbor.
peas in a pod? I mean, I don't know.
Okay, let's not go there.
Right, question?
I'd be interested in seeing that previous discussion. How would I find that? About the paving between either place? I'm just interested in a few more details.
I
Would it
wouldn't have
be
any
a-
more details than,
It was in a council meeting.
Yeah, I don't
think I don't think-
remember.
I don't think it was probably staff talking about,
Oh,
Best
No,
ele-
it came to council. We presented this
Okay.
concept to council. Never, Matt had done these renderings. We met with the,
with the parking for the Rod and Gun Club, though?
when we shifted, we had a grant, right, through the tourism restart money
Yep.
initially, and it was written to pave that parking lot, and after meeting with the Azushi Friendship Society and meeting with staff, it made more sense to direct that funding into completing the park on the north side, I guess, of the park, and so we didn't, we really moved the, that project to the north side as opposed to the Rod and Gun Club. It just got super complicated on the other side, and plus it, I think we need to think of what we're gonna do with that area. Is it just parking? Could it be housing? Could it be something else? And that gives us
with the
time
Rod
to
and
look
Gun
at-
Club part of it. you
Correct,
mean?
correct,
Perfect,
yeah.
okay. So can I?
Sure.
Supplemental, whatever. I'm just interested, because I think when I asked about this the last time, it said that's just sort of a concept drawing, what we had on the back wall there. And there were gonna be some changes around pedestrian and active transportation. Well, I guess pedestrian and cycles are active transportation. So is there timing for this paving? Will that come to council when those changes are made, or does that just go forward? I guess it's a process part that I'm interested in.
Yeah.
Because when I count the number of parking spots there, I'm thinking of something that Sam Allison said when he was here the last time. 34 parking spots that get 100% use one day of the week. Is
Yeah, I
that the
don't
most
think that's-
efficient way of?
Yeah, I would say that's not the case. I
Okay.
think, the idea is, so there's a few things, I think looking at the Railtown Snap.
Yeah, I did,
Because there's a
pretty
vision.
extensively.
There's a vision for,
Yeah.
for that whole redevelopment of that area. So, this will be a key park in the Railtown area, and it will be utilized as a regular park and into the future. So we anticipate, regular use of the park, not just on market days. It will be, and so we're planning for the future as that,
Yep,
as
perfect.
that area redevelops. We get more residential down there, we get more usage down there that, 30, I don't know if we have 34, whatever, that's, as you know, parking is a premium in all our parks, but, so where we are, we met with, staff met, Collins, and Rob and myself and Sebastian and Matt, and there was original sort of concept drawing that was presented to council. Public Works went away and did the engineering side of it and said, can we build this? And so we got together yesterday, and we're gonna refine the drawing that you saw here, probably more closely back to the original concept drawing, and we'll certainly share it with council. We've met with the Azuchi Friendship Society and looked at circulation and bicycle parking, and all those things are all built into that design. And, ultimately, if you have that place and you, down the road, you want to add less cars and more bike parking, it's just lines on a piece of paper, or on a
Yep,
pavement, right? So I don't think it limits, and we're always trying to build things flexible so that you have choices, but, the sidewalk, and, how do you circulate into the park? Is it safe? All those things, or where do you drop off? Where's the bike traffic? Where's handicap?
yeah,
Or disabled parking? All those things are part of that design, but we'll certainly share it with you once we get to, this last revision.
Final pass at it here.
yeah.
And, there's the complications, there's drainage, there's utilities, there's the creek there. How do we make all those things work? So,
Perfect, okay, that's just I am a member of the Isuzu Friendship Society, and I am there on a pretty regular basis, and I've personally never seen outside of market days any more than 5 or 6 cars, and that's on a big day. So it'll be interesting to see how, as Railtown develops,
yeah, there's no sidewalks, so there's no
Yeah.
draw to.
and people, it's hard to find.
Right.
It's
Like, we
new.
need to improve our
Most of the
signage.
people I've met there who weren't Nelson residents had been to the tourist information.
Right, trying
And
to
tourist
find-
information says you got to go down and see this place, and so they're
Yeah.
like, wow, and
Yeah.
it's pretty cool. So hopefully the
Yeah, and
wayfaring
there's the whole
signs that we're
wayfinding strategy,
wayfinding,
yeah.
wayfaring finding will also help people
Yeah.
locate it.
No, I honestly feel that as because there's been a lot of, and the Azuchi Society's done amazing
Oh,
work in there, and I really
gosh.
think that this park, I mean, it's been developing for a while, but I think that once we finally kind of sort of cement some of the finishing touches to it, I think there's gonna be a lot more people that will be making use of it, and once we've kind of pulled it all together, so. I think the wayfinding piece of it is a big, huge component too, because for somebody who's from out of town, it may not be really intuitive as to where you would go to get there, and so I think that giving people a good sense at that 4-way stop that, here's how you actually access this, and there is something to access, because if you were just sitting there and you're from out of town, you may not even cue into the fact that there's this beautiful park that's in behind that.
Yeah, so, thanks.
Okay, carry on.
Okay. Moving along, transportation, I believe we talked about this at the last meeting. Yes, we did. And again, this only changes on this was to utilize some efficiencies, I guess, in the streets component of this to do some additional work, like I said, in the parks and the laneways.
Can I just add
Yeah, yeah,
one little
absolutely.
interjection there, Chris?
Totally, yeah.
I just, for council, we had
Yeah.
given the drawing that showed the paving segments, and I was just saying with us using the paving portion to do the Cottonwood lot, I just have Rob going through the what we had given you as a drawing before, just to see how that would impact what he had planned out, and so we'll give you a modified version of that here once he's got that all figured out.
Thanks.
Councillor Lockenberg, question.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. So the two capital components that I'm interested in looking outward on is the cycling infrastructure, and then the fact that we don't have anything in the budget for 2024 to 2027. Do we not anticipate further investments? Like, given the plan, should we not be putting placeholders, or even though we don't have detailed plans? Like, how? Because we definitely, in our vision, it's there beyond 2023.
Yeah, I think the intent, there's some work to be done in 2024 to kind of further the design work for active transportation, and maybe do something in the Rosemont area or wherever, and then we would go out and look for some grants as well, like we did in the first round. So I think it's early to know how much, what the grant structure would be, what's available. So at this point in the planning, that's kind of where we're at, and then we would look to kind of come up with some numbers and move forward. But there is a plan in development services to kind of look at what that phase 2 of active transportation would look like, and would likely contain a grant component.
Okay, Mayor, if I may, just
Yes.
to follow up on that.
Sure.
So then, as a budgetary
Yeah.
process, even though, let's say we do anticipate some grants, there's generally some sort of municipal component to those grants.
Yeah.
Is it not? And then the second one was on the public transit. Like, there are capital investments that we know are out there. So we don't in terms of the budget process, you don't put placeholders or anticipating minimums or anything like that?
I mean, we
Just in terms of, so do we not have some grants we haven't heard on the,
yeah, there's some in there. There's the bike parking. There's smaller ones. There's a bike parking.
are they, they're in here?
They're in there. Yeah, the ones that we've applied for.
Where is that?
We don't have any in here that we haven't yet applied for, but there's a couple in, I think it's some sidewalks in Fairview, and some bike parking in there as well that are in the budget, because we've applied for the grants.
So the fact that we had applied for that grant and we didn't receive it for the cycling, I do think it's probably warranted that we put it in our financial plan, since we have a design, we have a amount, and we
Yeah.
can put it in as, similar to the library that we did in the past of,
Yeah, we can add something in there that's using sort of, the same sharing ratio that we did for phase 1. Yeah,
because we, the next grant we'll have to, get a council resolution, but if we have it in the financial plan, then, I think that allows us to show that, council has already approved it in the financial plan. We might have to, we'll have to see what the grants are, et cetera, at the time, and we might have adjusted, but I think it makes sense, since we've done the planning, we've kind of have a budget for it, and
Sure.
I think it signals that, that's definitely something that we're working towards.
Yeah. Yeah, and it probably, in applying for those grants, also signals that council's, serious about doing this, that we actually have it in the budget. So, yeah.
Councillor Payne.
I wasn't here, obviously, when you had this sharing ratio for phase 1. Can I get a 30-second explanation?
Well,
or-
I just meant, looking at when we did the phase 1 in Fairview, what
How much is
percentage of
grant
that
and
was
how much
grant
is city
funded and how much
budget?
was ours, and I don't off the top of my head recall what that was, but I was just thinking if we kind of have an estimate on the total cost for phase 2, could just sort of assume that we would get a similar type of funding for, that we did in phase 1, of just, how much would be grants and how much would be ours. Kind of use those same percentages, and I can't recall what that ratio was, but.
Yeah, because I mean, in the initial presentation that was given, it's obviously a large scope of project, but I I agree that there should be movement forward, and I know when we go to our strategic planning, we'll look at those values, but active transportation is something that we've clearly committed as a city to doing. So even with city funding, if there was a small section that we could do, even the, Stanley through to Hall Mines part of it there, because we know that particular intersection, even as it sits, could be much more friendly to active transportation. So I don't know if we need to bite off the whole piece at once, but I don't know how these projects work, but having some advancement, that's how, yeah.
Well, I
So
do
just
think
a
that
thought.
we have in the plan the advancement currently for 2023 in terms of we do need to make those interconnections in the Fairview area, and it's kind of nice to sort of, in some regards, sort of finish off one area of town before we jump into the other. I wouldn't want to see trying to fix a small part in one area while we recognize that there were some other issues over in the other spot. So it is a constant work in progress, and it is highly grant dependent. And then in case of sidewalks and stuff, I think sometimes, and staff can correct me if I'm wrong, but sometimes we're doing sidewalk repairs that are beneficial to the active transportation, but we don't have them in a line item called sidewalks that are due to the active transportation, right? Like, so sidewalks, so some work might get done in the area where we know we're gonna go in, and it's just gonna be done ahead of time and not in the sort of basket of active transportation in terms of maintaining some of our, particularly sidewalks.
And I think that's why we've combined transportation as a whole, and, whether we apply for an active transportation grant or whatever, whether that's a value, I think us managing all three ways that you get around our community, whether it's walking, cycling, or, in a vehicle, that if we manage that, and then it's council setting priorities. Where do we want to, we might invest more on cycling because we're a bit behind on cycling, and or sidewalks or whatever, and we look at that in totality and just keep that message in front of everyone in our staff that, we're responsible for these three ways to get around our community, and, we probably have traditionally invested more on the vehicle side, and we need to now invest more on the maybe the cycling or sidewalk side of it, so. And then, like I said, last time, when we look at our funding sources, then we can look at that, that in totality and say, do we have enough funding in that whole transportation sector? And do we need to generate more revenues from parking meter fees or whatever to provide more funding, because we see a shortfall there. So that's the way we're approaching this.
If I may maybe follow up on that. I think one of the challenges I had and still have with, say, Nelson Next and some of our planning, and then how does that translate into budgets going forward? I find that I'm often sort of guessing at, well, if we did Nelson Next as we claim to, it will cost X. It's just sort of this random kind of pull from the air sort of, and it would be great. And I'm almost wondering if this is something we need to amend in our budget making process, or do we hire an outside support to do that, to start costing these big visions out so that we have this sort of guiding budget that reflects the plans we have. Because when I look at some of this stuff, this to me is fairly status quo, I'm not saying that's a bad thing at all. It's sort of keeping the train on the tracks, it's making some adjustments. But I think when we map that against, say, Nelson X and the ambitions of Nelson X, it's just not clear how those two interrelate. And ideally, it would be great for me if I could see the budget side of Nelson Next, and then just sort of use that as a comparison as we go forward. Like, okay, well, we're on active transportation or on transportation, we're underinvesting relative to what we are aiming to do, say, with Nelson Next by X amount. And so that that would empower me when I'm talking to our provincial counterparts or the federal government, just to be able to say, here's effectively your plan as the federal government and the provincial government. In Clean BC, it's essentially handing down a vision onto local governments. And then here's the budget disparities between the two. So that's, I don't think we need an answer now, but it's something that I've struggled with myself, and in conversations I find I'm making things up a little too much in terms of pulling numbers out of the air.
Yeah, I think that's a good discussion at council priorities of what we want to do, because it's a dynamic plan, not a static plan. So,
Right.
Right. It's hard to cost a dynamic plan because we don't really know
We don't.
every
There's
step
too many
that we're
unknowns.
going to do. Certainly, we could say, here's a part of it that we know that we did the cycling infrastructure is X, but I think a great discussion to have what that looks like.
Councillor Page.
I just wanted to comment briefly, sorry, Mayor, on just that piece as well. I think that, some of the changes that we're moving towards, like having development services and, kind of our climate team being one group is going to sort of help that as well as we sort of work together. Having that new Fortis position that's going to be helping Sam Ellison out with the buildings and kind of creating those linkages, and that it's not going to be just this isolated department on the 5th floor. There's going to be a lot more interconnectivity going on. So I think we'll be able to kind of build on that sort of thing. But yeah, I appreciate your insight into that, and we'll definitely keep that on the radar of how we can move towards something like that.
Great,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah, I look forward to the subsequent budget, including the allocation across to cycling as well, that when we're going through and we're doing the paving or sidewalking, that we figured out what allocation of the parking revenue is also for facilities and pieces that go along with that. I think that makes a lot of sense. It creates that tie-in. The advocation piece, I'm just a little through the chair to Lautenberg. Are we talking climate caucus? Are we talking FCM? Like what kind of advocation are you speaking about?
Like when we go, say, to UBCM and meet with the minister, and we say, the advocacy example at the UBCM Climate Action Committee, when we were working directly with our provincial counterparts, they had no idea what they were asking of local governments. They would set these big aspirational targets, and then the work plan from them to us was, now go turn those into your municipal climate action plans. But the connection to finances was not there at all. It was just big, broad numbers. And they would ask us in those meetings, and we're like, I don't know how much this is going to cost. There's no sense of reality to many of these big ideas. So I think in circumstances like that, when you're having these official sometimes or side conversations with people at the province, yeah, for me, it's this sort of, I need to be more connected to reality when we talk about these big ideas in conversation with the province, because they're, like I said, many of these things are their plans. Like Clean BC sets these big targets, and municipal governments are responsible for a big part of that, but we don't have any idea for feeding back to them what it might cost.
Yeah, we just need to make sure that we're looping everybody in on those conversations. Like
Yeah.
you just said sidebar, and that's always a bit of a concern in terms of the fact that we have staff, and most of the things coming from the government are staff, and sometimes staff to staff is a good relationship to have, politician to politician, obviously, and there is that opportunity for staff to politician. But I think that we need to make sure that everybody's looped in on the discussions and trying to find the focus. And I hear your request for, like, what is Nelson doing, and can the parameters be a bit clearer? But I think that it's just a cautionary tale in terms of, they have some grandiose plans, the provincial government, which aren't very well funded. And I think it's also inherent on them to do some due diligence to see what their plans look like, not again download onto the municipal governments to try to figure out what the cost is going to be.
Yeah.
But I mean, one thing for sure I can say is I believe that Nelson, compared to many other communities in the province, is at the ready. And if they're about to throw some cash at it, we got the people that know how to get it. So that for me is one of the things that I know that we're very, very good at. And I think we all appreciate the ability of our grant writers, and the fact that everybody's on the lookout for any mention of money flowing. But again, I've just been participating in a program that's for around housing, and it's just like, don't download this stuff. This isn't you guys need to do more work. The government sometimes has to do more work before they start espousing certain activities. And I would say that Clean BC is a great aspirational document that belongs to the provincial government. And they need to put some dollars and some effort behind it, not just downloading it down to the municipalities to figure it out.
Yeah, I 100% agree, Mayor. And I would say in terms of like the sidebar conversations and so on, I think we all have meetings, conversations with various MLAs, MLA Anderson, for example, or Minister Heyman when he was here, on and on and on. And they know, and we talk about each of us talk about Nelson Next as this aspirational plan. And when LGCAP funding, as an example, was negotiated and developed, there was very little sense of what and why that number was important. It was just, here's $75 million or $70+ million, go have it. And there's no feedback loop mechanism about between the vision, the plans, the policies, and what it's actually going to cost. And just as a general,
I think all I'm really finding root here, and the mayor touched on it and resonated with, is as much as we can, it's finding that root and grounding amongst us all here as a table, and then doing that advocation piece from as one group. And we've all had that, much like we had the conversation, or started to have the conversation about the 911 fee, like where are the values, what are the ideas around this table, what that is, and that same kind of thing here is like, how are we bringing Nelson Next alive in our work and operationally going forward is very much like the second phase of that document and work for this term. We've done the aspirations, we've done the big visioning, we've done the document, and now it's like you're doing right now, like how do we bring it to ground? How do we take that document and bring it to the budget? How do we make sure it's moving forward? And then in the same way, when we're going out and advocating on a provincial and federal level, what is our story? What are we trying to advocate for? What have we wrestled with as a group, as a table, and going out and through the mayor and through however we sanction that to go and chase down those problems as we see fit. Mm-hmm. That's just why I bring it up.
yeah.
Back.
To
Okay.
the budget.
Okay, so if there's nothing more on the transportation side, downtown waterfront is a little bit of a smaller area, but it's just kind of doing some of the things in the downtown here, you know, updates to public art. We got, you know, tree lighting. We did put something in here starting, we're going to focus on the parks and the bear bins in 2023, and then look out 2024 and beyond to see if there's opportunities to start replacing bear bins in the downtown, or not replacing bear bins, replacing bins with bear bins in the downtown.
Councillor Page,
We
and
may
then I
have
think
moved-
Councillor Tate.
We may have moved from transportation too quickly,
yeah,
but
sure,
it's
yeah.
it's about lighting.
Yep.
Everyone's favorite topic. So I've been house sitting this week out in Fairview, so I've been using the bikeway extensively. And what's actually struck me is the number of streetlights along that bikeway that are malfunctioning in the cold. Like it's more than half a dozen. I've documented them. I'll send something over to Public Works. But when we're looking at, especially along a primary corridor like that, and we're looking at the festive lighting, and we're looking at places like, you know, of how we're upgrading the comfort and even just the ambiance of those main corridors, do we have something in our budget to keep extending things like the festive lighting, or just like going above and beyond what a typical street light might be to create more of a inviting space along these active transportation primary corridors?
I'd say on the festive lighting,
In between, like,
yeah, so just on the festive lighting side, I think what we have now is what can be supported within the funding that's provided. In fact, we've had failures much quicker than we anticipated with those first rounds of lighting.
we expected 3 years, right?
Pardon?
We expected 3 years, right? Their 3-year warranty.
I thought we I thought we
Hope
had
for more,
budgeted
but-
5 or something. But,
Yeah.
you know, that's what, you know, I think there's a difference between warranty period and how long they're supposed to last. And I think based on what we were told, I can't remember, they were a 5-year cycle or whatever, so we definitely had failures on that first set of lighting. So that's the festival. I wouldn't recommend at this time we extend the festival lighting to areas that we're not going to be able to maintain. As you've heard me say before, when I first got here, we had lighting down all the side streets and down the maintain, and we had like one light bulb burning in a tree, and I believe in doing less well than more poorly, and I think what we have in the downtown is probably what we can maintain. I don't know if we, have lighting in the budget to improve on our cycling and primary walking corridors, but I agree with you as a walker when I was in uphill that, some of our prime areas to walk are like super dark and super not very pedestrian friendly. You go into these dark places that you never know if you're going to come out of them, or there's ice or whatever is going on there. So so I don't think we have it in there, but I think that's a good catch that we need to look at that. And I think it's, what do trees look like? What do benches look like? What does lighting look like? If people are going to use a corridor, then there has to be something attractive for them to use that
Yeah,
corridor.
to be invited into,
So,
especially in
yeah.
these winter months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Counselor Payne?
I guess this is through the mayor to Councillor Page. I just am interested in some clarity when you say malfunctioning. So you mean like the light bulb needs to be
Yeah,
repaired?
probably the
or-
ballast.
Okay,
They're cycling.
Oh,
Like-
okay, yeah, it could be a balance.
Yeah, and then I noticed
Because-
1 or 2 the first time, and then the second time a different 1 or 2, and so I've got about 6 different photos between Hume and the bikeway entrance. Yeah,
and
I'll
I,
send them to you.
sorry. And I asked that because at the intersection where I live, Observatory and Kootenai, a few years ago, the light standard was replaced, and it has some auto on shut-off feature. Don't know if you've noticed that, Councillor Tate, going up that way. That seems to be set for car traffic. So when a car comes up, it turns on. So that gives you enough time to get around the corner. It doesn't necessarily function for pedestrians, so I don't know if that's something that is actually true, or I just don't walk fast enough, because I get into that
Wave your arm
range.
more.
Yeah, I guess it's like the lights in here. I should wave my arms a few more times as I'm walking
Rumbling
out,
of the
so
car triggers the ballast.
it hits me. So I don't know if that's something going forward with these active transportations on the side of, saving energy, so they're not full-on blast all the time, but staying on long enough so that not just a car goes by, but a pedestrian can make it through that to light it up. I love the fact that light is not on 100% of the dark hours. But I think if there is movement, whether it's a vehicle or active transportation, maybe a bear walking by gives me a little notice not to go there. If the light comes on, I'll start looking around. But I just wanted to point that out. It's just a question more than anything, but when Councillor Page was saying malfunctioning, I just wondered if he meant when he got to some of those lights, they just weren't automatically coming on because he's a pedestrian or a cyclist. And I'm not
They're
sure what
definitely
that was.
malfunctioning.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're definitely a ballast flipping, especially as the cold weather, and I think it's more of the newer LED ones that are doing it.
Yeah.
They seem
Yeah.
more
They take-
temperamental.
Okay. But that's just the experience, the one experience that I have just at my
surprised there's
corner. I
another
assume
one.
it's other places around as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'll have to check and find out what kind of fixture that they have there. I know looking at a bunch of the different lighting suppliers, what you're describing of something where they reduce the lighting and then brighten the lighting as somebody's traveling through the space is something where they've really gone in the new fixtures that are out
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, great idea.
Which is a great idea, and that you're only lighting what you absolutely kind of have to. I can't recall if this fixture is that. I'm kind of thinking it's kind of, as Councillor Page is suggesting, there might actually be something where the ballast is maybe doing something finicky, but I'll have to double check. I just honestly don't recollect whether it was a special fixture or not.
I'll do a few trials on the weekend. I'll get in a vehicle and see if that makes it happen. But
Stomp around.
it did definitely change when they replaced that
Okay.
whole thing a couple of years ago.
I think if it's a bear, it should change to a different color.
I do too. It should start flashing. Not for the skunks, just for the bears.
Okay, staff.
Okay. Yeah, so I didn't have too much more to add on the bear bins or that piece. Again, this is sort of a smaller area. Storm sewer, yeah, we talked a bit about this and the upgrade project. I know that you, Colin, you presented, maybe it was like September or something last year, but I don't know if there's like a brief version of sort of what's intended in that project. Yeah.
Thumbnail sketch. So what was done was in taking a look at how our system would perform, we worked with a consultant to project out what the impact of a change in climate would do as far as, with more intense rainstorms and more volume of water that's going to need to get dealt with, and taking a look at within the system where there would have to be upsizing done in the system in order to mitigate those changes. And so we have a series of maps showing locations where you would need to do those various upsizings, and then that's what when we made the application, we relied on the plan that was presented there in making our application. And so it is directly, I mean, it's for climate mitigation, and the work itself is very on point, so to speak, with what we have applied for as far as a funding source goes. So I'm really hoping that we will be hearing on this, because I think it was very well suited for the funding that we applied for.
Okay. If there's any questions on that, I'll.
Question?
Yep.
Yeah, can you help me understand the difference between redirect and storm infrastructure upgrade and stormwater chamber? Is this
Yes.
all to get the stormwater to not go through the wastewater treatment plant? Or what is what? What is that?
Sure.
Thanks.
Okay, so the hydrodynamic separator, and I can't remember if that one's for Duck Bay in 2025 or not, but what the hydrodynamic separators are is, as your stormwater's coming, it normally is picking up a whole lot of dust off of the street and gravels and oils and all these kinds of things. And what a hydrodynamic separator allows for is for those items to, you settle out the solids that are in it, and you're keeping the oils in there and then passing the water through. And so what the intention behind a hydrodynamic separator is putting the water that goes into the lake and is released, or into any water body, isn't carrying all those silts and things. So of course that's very hard on fish and the impact there. So that's what a hydrodynamic separator is for.
Oh, pause before you move to the next one. Is Duck Bay a location?
Duck Bay is a
Duck
location.
Bay is a location, and so this is one only hydrodynamic stormwater chamber.
This would be, I have to double look on this one, whether Duck Bay, I seem to remember Duck Bay carrying across the budget sheet for a number of years here, so I'll have to double check
Yep.
that for
Okay,
you.
thank you.
But yeah, Duck Bay is just down on the other side of the
Yep.
mall. There's that little bay in there,
Yep.
and that's where that would be.
So Colin, how many of these do we have in our system now?
Well, we've got, let's see, 2 at Hall Street. We're actually in our Cottonwood parking lot design. There's 2 smaller units that go into there. I'd have to double check with Rob, but the number, I think we got 6 of them, Kevin, if I'm remembering correctly. I could be wrong on that though, sorry.
Yeah, order of magnitude.
Sure, yeah, we have a number of them that are in place, and they're a very common thing for taking care of particulate matter that, so you're not putting that into a water body.
Okay.
Now let's see here, what was the next one? So the upgrade to mitigate climate change is that project that I was talking about. And the catch basin redirect, what that is as we're doing works, there's historically putting stormwater into a sanitary system was seen as actually being not a bad practice at all. It was thought that, well, hey, this is actually not a bad thing. It'll help flush out anything that deposits in there. And we know that after a whole lot of basement flooding and then, putting sewage out into rivers and lakes and things like that, that wasn't a good thing that was done. Now, the city has largely disconnected the majority of these things, but periodically you'll wind up and you'll be out there and you'll find an old connection that still exists when you're doing work. And so some of that's to take care of that. And then there can also be, while we're doing a project, we'll have to move a catch basin just because of how we've adjusted the curbing or something that's been done with the surface contour, and so a catch basin has to be in a different place, and so that money too can be used, or we're redirecting where the new catch basin's gone and put it into the storm system.
Okay, now I got a big lineup. Councillor Tate, do you have any further?
No, I think I got it. Thanks.
Okay, so then we have Councillor Lockberg, Councillor Payne, and then Councillor Page.
Colin, so through the chair, Colin, given the size of these investments to do our storm infrastructure upgrades, as well as probably a number of other climate-related upgrades, I think I mentioned this the last time we talked, but if not, can you explain again? So I've recently become aware of PIVC. I did that Public Infrastructure Vulnerability Assessment Protocol Committee and their set of products. Are we looking at those sort of established engineering assessment products to really make sure that the investments we're making do align with, because it sounds like, from what I understand about PIVC, they've really established not only the assessment and the forecasting systems, but also how those forecasting systems directly tie to Canadian public infrastructure, and then establish a bunch of protocols around it, best practices and so on, just so you don't drop, $9 million and realize, there's some big blind spots that we should have looked at. So
Sure.
have you?
Good question. I know, right when I joined the city, there was actually two PIVAC, I guess, with PIVC is what I always call it, but you're probably right. Anyways, there had been a look at, I know there was a report that was done, there was two reports that were done, and then actually when we did the Hall Street work, the lady that had been involved in doing the PIVAC work was actually involved in the design of what we did for the stormwater there. So I can't say that we, it's not like we put out a report about that, as a PIVAC investigation, but a lot of those same principles were applied into what we did there.
Okay.
And so we have looked at that with how these were done. I think when they looked at these, they considered those things as well as, what is, climate, range of climate, implication was going to happen depending on which one of the pathways that you consider that we're going to wind up with, as how is the climate going to affect the rainfall. And I think they went with I think it's RCP 8.5, which is pushing towards the higher end of that. And so the work that is flagged here is based more on approaching it more from a conservative end of climate change projection than to be coming at it on, let's say, the lower end of it. So, and I think a bunch of that is being done, from an engineering perspective. We're always looking to, when you figure out what you need to do, then there's always a factor of safety that you're always applying to things to try to, because if you've calculated you need exactly this much, you're always building some kind of thing in there. And so in looking at these things, I think that the assessments they made make sense. They ran it through a model. So we have like a storm system model, and they ran these things there to see where we had trouble. And then that's where these segments got picked up.
Great, thanks.
Councillor Payne?
I'm just under the assumption, so I just want to confirm that the water flowing out of the hydrodynamic stormwater chambers is also measured and reported by provincial or federal environmental agency. Are there certain standards that we have to meet with that water?
We don't actually report, because basically where a hydrodynamic separator comes in is right before you have a storm outfall to the lake or to a creek. Okay. And so we're not, there's no metering of that quantity that's going through.
But just the quality of the water coming out, is that important?
We're not required to monitor quality. I mean, that being said, at the same time, like, let's say we're doing a project which could have an impact, where we know there's a silt or sedimentation issue that could be caused by that, we are monitoring that while that work is occurring, because of course we don't want to create an impact. But as far as day-to-day use goes, no. But however, these products, the way that they're designed is to really to settle out most of that, and I think they've been proven to be highly effective. And so, as opposed to a regulator saying to us, well, you need to monitor this or sample it and things like that, because we've got the hydrodynamic separator, they say, oh, okay, well, you're doing the right thing, and so that's when they're not then looking for additional testing or something like that on top of
Okay, so it's really just protecting our natural resources primarily, which I think is a high value in our community. I'm just interested, I'm smiling because every time I think of the new saline solution that Director Henderson, not sure if I have the title correct there, but apologies if not, has suggested along with the saline solution that will go on the roads.
The brine.
The brine,
yes.
the brine, thank you.
Yep.
Will that have any effect on?
Yeah, actually, that's a really good question, and yeah, I believe it will, and the reason is that what the idea with the brine making is that, I mean, you still are using salts, and I mean, and we know that salts aren't good for any kind of water body. But with the brine making, you're using, I think he said it was 10% of what you would normally be using for a salt application. So you're already reducing the amount of chlorides that potentially are going to flow off, and so it will help with that. A hydrodynamic separator will not deal with chlorides because chlorides dissolve in water, and so they get carried with it. So not putting as much chloride down then is the right solution to pursue for that. So I think the brine making is good for that. Okay. Where it will help in this regard is that if they're able to put the brine down, and then not, because you've broken that bond and you're not needing to put as much of the sand product out after it, then there isn't as much of the sand to get washed into the hydrodynamic separators and all these things. And so you're kind of removing a lot of that kind of source material that would otherwise be, coming in there that you're then trying to knock out. So if you're able to, both protect it before it's going into the lake, as well as not putting as much of the source material there that's going to wash in there and cause you the issue, then you're really reducing the amount of impact that you're having on a water body.
Which could possibly prolong the life of the.
I would think that it would. I mean, obviously, it would be not putting suspended solids and things like that into the lake is ultimately going to be a positive net benefit thing.
Thank you. Just interested how that's going to
So
affect it as we
Brian
move
gets
forward.
2 checks in the good column.
Yes. Yeah.
And if
Councillor
the lake
Page.
looks a little pink, it'll.
And it's gonna be pink,
Pink.
brown.
It's going to be
Good
pink.
solution, no pun
So
intended.
3 ticks, because it's gonna have beets in it.
Are we going to grow the beets at Lakeside?
I don't know if we have that many beets.
So inside of the storm, we've had the preliminary conversations of potentially breaking this out into its own utility and thinking about how we might service this on an ongoing basis, being that there's other aspirations for renewal of the stormwater system that go above and beyond what we see here in this financial plan. So that would be my first question: is when are we going to have a more fulsome discussion about what this looks long term? And part of what's prompting that is when I look at the catch basin redirects, and we kind of bring forward the conversation of how to bring Nelson Next alive in our operational budget. Some of the some of the practices being done out there to redirect stormwater into, what do you call them, natural water gardens or whatever, that then go into the stormwater after the lighter rains have had an opportunity to collect and go to ground, and if there's more, then the catch basin's a little further along, but we don't have too many examples, I think, in the city of doing that yet, but it would be something I think we would want to start to slowly incorporate into our curbing as we're doing these catch basin redirects. And is $50,000 the kind of money that will get us there? And if not, are we having that fulsome discussion at some point about storm water utility and how it becomes transformed and meets all these other values we want to meet?
Sure. Great question. I'll defer to Chris on the component of running it as a utility. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to answer the other piece?
And I think doing a project like this might be a good catalyst for then saying, look, we need to, because there'll be some borrowing involved, then having it be its own self-funded utility, just like water, just like wastewater, and how we fund that through a user fee as opposed to taxation and have that work. It's definitely on the radar, and I think I agree it's something we should kind of look at it a little bit more detailed, but at this point, I don't have an answer of, when we would do that, but I think having this on here is that kind of good sort of point of saying, okay, when we incur some debt, we need to kind of think about how we can structure this in a sustainable manner, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
And to your question, as far as making use of these kind of things, one of the things in the Cottonwood work that we're looking to do down there is there's actually two rain gardens and another swale that is incorporated into the design there. And with what we're doing there, it's actually some of the work that the city of Vancouver has started doing. They've just actually brought on a whole new what they call like a green infrastructure branch that they've started to move on these things. And so I had through the engineers and geoscientists annual conference, I had taken in a little seminar session that they had done on the work that they're doing, and so this is all new work that's being developed. And so we're going to be incorporating some of that into the parking lot design. But I do think that, especially for something when we come to doing, the major refresh of Baker Street, I really think that comes into play there. And where I think it's particularly important is in making use of, when you're putting in street trees. I mean, you're wanting to obviously make sure that you're not having everything grow and grow into your storm system and all that. But what they are doing in Vancouver and starting to do is that you're actually using that whole network and infrastructure with that to bring water into
the tree.
and using that. I mean, you still obviously have to have an overflow because you can still have a massive rain event or whatever that you've got a surplus you got to deal with. But a lot of what they're doing is trying to use all of your street trees and how you're using that drainage to deal with stormwater. And where I think that it could really be of advantage for us is that we've got a lot of contribution that still comes off the roof leaders of buildings in the downtown, and redirecting that and being able to use a system like that for buffering as opposed to just having to supersize everything to get the water out of the downtown. And so I see more of this coming. I think that it's just going to make more and more sense as we go along to incorporating these things into design. But you will see some of it this year.
Okay.
Councillor Lockenberg has a question, please.
Thank you, Chris. There's this matrix that someone shared with me yesterday that apparently many municipalities use it. This one coming from the District of North Van, which is this: when looking at a service or service fees, there's this balance between the public and private goods, and then they divide up their user fee versus taxation based on the expected or the ratio of, is this 75% public good versus 25% private good? And then they sort of divide up the tax user fee accordingly. So I hadn't heard this before as sort of a way of thinking about user fees. And it does seem to me there's all sorts of inequities in our system. You hear complaints across the board, including on the water utility. The basing fees on the number of installations versus flow and metering and all that kind of stuff. Do we have, when we consider any of our fees and services, do we have any sort of rationale like that?
I haven't thought of that before. It's interesting. I'll take a look at that. You said it's North Van that sort of.
Yeah, this one
Yeah.
that was shared with me was North Van,
Yeah.
but apparently this is a common thing.
Interesting.
I hadn't heard about.
Yeah, and I mean, what kind of came to mind is thinking about transit, and that user fees clearly don't pay for the
Yeah,
service.
that's a good
There's
example.
a taxation portion of that, but the public is obtaining a benefit by someone else taking the bus, right? Like
Yeah.
there's fewer cars on the road, the air's cleaner, etc. So, that's something that just kind of occurs, but I hadn't kind of looked at that before. So yeah, it's interesting. I'll have a look. But yeah, I don't know that we've, definitely with our water and wastewater, it's meant to be self-contained.
Yeah.
I'll take a look though. That's interesting.
It's very similar to the recreation fees
was
and
gonna
charges by law, which
Yeah.
really brought all together, like who gets subsidized, why, here's these values, these are these percentages, and then the fees are derived after the taxation is allocated according to the policy.
Yeah, and that's a great point, and something that I've struggled with certainly over the
send you
last
now.
couple of weeks in trying to come up with a rationalization of how we're allocating X amount to this group or this utility and versus that, and I haven't had a good answer. It's more just kind of go by the feel, go by status quo. But okay, if you'd look into that,
Yeah, absolutely.
that would be
Yeah,
great.
thank you.
Are you, like, I think on the water and sewer utility, I think, there's kind of policy decisions. Are you trying to change people's habits and obviously a meter helps maybe change some people's habits. And so I would say, certainly in our utility, because it's a capital intensive utility, not a operating intensive utility like a electric utility, that like whether in our water utility and sanitary, because that's the other end of the water, regardless of how much water you use, our costs really don't change, right? Because it's the cost to get it to your house, not the cost of how much water is at this time. And as water gets scarcer, that might change. So that would be more of if metering for us would more likely be more of getting habit change, right? Of getting people to use less water, as opposed to allocating costs fairly. And those are two policy choices, right? Is this about allocating people the fair cost, or is this about actually encouraging change? And I think those are the policy discussions that council needs to have. And it sounds like this model, I haven't seen that before either, is that sort of probably same thing is and I think in rec, that's not an allocation of cost. That's actually looking at who do we are there some folks that are don't have access to certain services because of financial capability in many ways. So those are we've approached this to date on a cost side. Are we allocating costs fairly between users? And yes, it's a little bit rough and fixtures and things like that, but still that was an idea of we size services and stuff, et cetera, to to accommodate the amount of water use you're supposed to have. So so on that cost kind of there was some logic behind it. Is it refined in today's world? Probably not. And is there other policy choices that council want to consider beyond just costs? So I think they're all worth good discussion, and Chris can have a look at this. I just wanted to point out there's a few different things we're looking at when you're looking at those things.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay.
Back at you.
Okay. Vehicles we didn't, and equipment we didn't get a chance to talk about last time. I don't have a lot to add to this. We just have our regular vehicle replacements, and Jody Cayley was here to kind of explain what the plan was for 2023 and beyond. We have a lot of vehicles. We have, just kind of counting up what is in his replacement plan there. Over the next 10, 20 years, I mean, there's over 100 vehicles there that we maintain. In the light duty, there's about 20 or so, 40 for heavy equipment. Like, we have a lot of different equipment that we maintain. And so significant pieces in here, of course, are looking out to the ladder truck replacement, which has to be replaced by 2027. We did get an extension on that already, and that's kind of where we're at for that. So we've got that in for 2026 and 2027. I think mid-year is sort of when that would need to be replaced by. Just some other equipment and thing, and then you can refer back to his presentation for some specifics on what was the plan for 2023. I know these challenges with, and as he mentioned last time, with just supply chain and just, this is the plan anyway, and hopefully we can obtain some of these, but sometimes he doesn't even know when they're going to be building them, let alone when they're going to be arriving, right? So.
I think one of the things that we have to recognize again, and it was recognized when we had Jody Cayley in, is the fact that our shop does such a great job of, because I'd have to say is that there's lots of stuff that carries over year to year because we didn't get the grant, or other things. But in terms of like vehicles, which is kind of like a day-to-day thing, and we don't write grants to get vehicles. Well, in the case of the electric one, maybe we did, but in general, we don't write grants, so we're not waiting on that. And so this is one of those budget things that I that's the most common one that I see gets carried over because of lack, and particularly in these last few years, because of lack of availability, or in the case of some of the bigger pieces of equipment like the fire trucks, it's just the outstanding work that's been done to keep them maintained, to be able to push them out further while we at the same time add. It's not like we then spend all the money willy-nilly. I mean, we continue to add to the reserve for vehicles, but I think that we have to recognize the work that the team is doing there to keep the fleet on the road at all times. So,
Yeah, just really quickly, I want to be clear that I understand this, that vehicle that we've got scheduled for 2027 is too big for the current fire hall.
Yeah, I think, I was talking to the fire chief there, and I think, it sort of depends on the configuration of that. There's some different things you can do, the placement of the ladder, whether it's in the middle of the truck or the back of the truck. So I think there's some possibilities there, but, at the same time, we're still looking at getting that feasibility study done for the fire hall in 2023 here. So, I don't think there's a hard answer on that yet, that it will fit, or no, it won't fit, or yes, it will fit. I think there's some customization to the vehicle, and like I say, depending on where that ladder is, that different things can be done. So,
I think the best way he described it to me was we're building our fire apparatus to fit our fire hall versus, selecting fire apparatus that's right for the for our needs. So we're, And the other thing I just wanted to say about the equipment reserve is, first of all, it's self-contained. So, we do not take money out of this to fund something else. And, as we explained before, we charge every department for the equipment that goes in to maintain it, et cetera, and replace it at the end of the day. And the final thing is, there are not a lot of municipalities that, have a equipment reserve that they are in a position to replace their equipment when it comes to end of life. So we're, this took us probably 15, 20 years to get here, and even with this, I see here we have, we shouldn't necessarily have to borrow for this ladder truck. It should have been contributing and paying for that reserve. So we did ask Chris to have a look at what we're charging out our various equipment at, because if we're not adding new equipment, it should be able to be funded through here. And so anyway,
Are you saying that we're charging other departments for the fire services?
No, the fire
Okay.
we charge them annual fee that pays for its maintenance, its fuel,
But
and
not-
depreciation, so that it can be replaced at the end of the day.
Right, but we don't.
but not
we
to other
don't-
departments, no. Public Works doesn't get charged for the fire truck. We'll excuse the time that Sarah, took it on a joyride, but, and it was a weird charge in the administration budget.
You mean the Santa Claus parade?
Yeah,
Even for replacing the banner, the fire department doesn't charge for
Charge
that?
general admin for that.
The banner on Baker Street, they don't charge for anything like that. That's just part of exerciser training.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's actually a benefit to the crews to be able to go out there and get the ladder out and get up there and stuff.
people love to see it.
Yeah. And just like really briefly, how the whole mechanics of the charging out works. So every time that someone in Public Works gets in a vehicle and drives out, they put that on their timesheet. I was working at Lakeside Park for 4 hours, and I was in truck number 1, 2, 3, 4. So then that gets charged out at an hourly rate, and then that goes into Jody's kind of budget as a revenue source for him to maintain those vehicles and have enough that he can then go replace them. And then in the case of the police and fire, we don't charge on an hourly, but we do come up with what's the annual amount that you should have for your vehicles, because most of the time they're not going anywhere, right? So except the police ones, but the fire ones are just sitting there. Yeah. So we just come up with an annual amount and say, this is what you should be paying for the maintenance and replacement. With the case of the big ladder truck, yeah, we need to do something. We couldn't get the reserve to that position where we had, $2.5 million in additional that we could replace that. But you'll see when we get to the equipment replacement reserve, we are expecting to have to increase those charge out rates, and specifically for fire to be able to then amortize that over its life.
Councillor Payne?
So just for my understanding, so there's an hourly charge out rate for all of the equipment at Public Works?
Correct. Yep.
And the fire truck is charged out
To fire.
as well to fire.
Yep.
That goes into that budget.
We have this,
Yeah.
yeah, so the fleet manages, they get the revenue, and they do all the maintenance and all that, and that's charged against their budget. So all these charges from all these departments flow into their
Yeah.
budget. They, all the gas, the maintenance, all is charged against that. And then there should be a surplus at the end, which is what we can put in the equipment reserve. So just as Chris said, so one of our dump trucks, in the winter, it's been charged to snow plowing. In the summer, it's out on doing utility work, so that, the charge for that's going to utilities. We might be doing third-party work, so that would go to a third party that would pay for the vehicle at that time. So that's how we charge out our vehicles.
Any more questions about vehicles and transportation? Because as I see everybody getting antsy in their seats, I think this could be a good time before we move on to the next one.
You want to take a quick break?
Chris, yeah, we'll take a
Yep,
break.
sure. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're almost done the capital piece, and then we
Okay.
were into reserve, so it's good timing. Yep.
Okay, so. And that's my true question.
Wasn't driven by the homeowner, it was driven by
The market,
The system, yeah.
by the capital
I think that's
market.
when he's talking about it being private property. That's where I'm getting at, is that if you just equate
Conversion
real
of private
estate
property.
with other types of private capital and
Yeah.
it becomes
Yeah, sure.
utterly perverse asset.
It should be different, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
For families and all those things.
This housing supply, whatever it is I'm doing on this housing supply committee, that's a question that's in my mind, is there really, is there truly a shortage? This is a point that it can be argued all day, of supply, or is it just that the supply
It's inaccessible.
is inaccessible?
The argument
Because
of
people
hoarding.
have used it as an investment. And I remember going to housing, because housing is always at a UBCM. And I remember coming back into local government and going to that first UBCM in 2014. And they were talking about, and an economist from UBC said that when you look at the numbers and you do the growth, the population growth, and you look out and you look at the rate at which we're building houses, we have the supply. So what is the issue? And he said back then, the issue is everybody buying it up for investment purposes and not giving a rat's ass shit whether the stuff falls down or whether they rent it to make subsequently more, but just on the idea that invest and be willing to invest for 10 or 20 years, just like they tell you when you want to buy your stock or your equity, better to keep it for the long run, and they don't care. And so that's my question is it really, and then the Housing Supply Act, when you read it, talks about that they want to pinpoint areas to put that regulation into that are high growth, high whatever area. And to me, it's like, if that's the most popular, if the West End of Vancouver is the most popular place to be, and we already know that half of it's already being held by investors, why the hell would we build more housing there so that investors could buy more of it? No, you need to get people to move away from perhaps the city, and not like way away. They don't have to come to Nelson, or they don't have to go to Cranbrook or whatever, but you have to think about, create the impetus for a high growth,
For the middle.
high interest area somewhere else.
Well, you have to make those places equally attractive with parks and walkable
Well,
neighborhoods and density
And there are lots of places
access.
that have that, but it's just that whole idea of you want to build more housing where there's already this huge demand. which I consider to be quite artificial, but like, how
Chicken
do you make
egg,
these decisions?
chicken egg.
Selma,
Failure of regulation.
should all go to Selma.
We should probably get back onto the topic of the day
They bring in 500,000 people a year.
before I have to give a little.
Right. Right.
Can't wait till the.
Okay, so we're back at it.
I have a question for this page. I'm ready.
Okay. Well, I think we were just told before we broke that we'd already done this page, but anyhow.
Yeah, I'm happy
Nearly.
to take
He
any
said
questions.
nearly.
I know that we went through this one when we had Sam Ellison here, but, you know, let's.
Question
fire
away.
Yeah, can I ask a question?
Sure you can.
So, based on some of Sam's comments last week, I was wondering if moving forward, this might be a big ask, but I know that, like in 2015, there was some upgrades done to the civic arena itself, like the paint and the asbestos and whatnot. It's really difficult to tell with line 9 how it says civic center. I was wondering if it would be possible to pull out the civic arena building separately. Because these big chunks of money, I think, has a lot to do with the theater, gymnastics, the senior center and all of those pieces. And the arena building itself it joins, but it is like separate. And it comes with like a whole conundrum of ideas
things,
and
yeah.
opinions and such. How hard would that be?
We track those two buildings separately, the complex versus I think we just accumulated them.
Okay. I think that because there's a lot of public interest in the arena versus the civic center, that it would be really great to be able to pull those lines out separately, just as we start to look into like how the investments are playing out and what is the cost. It's separate roofs, it's separate accessibility. I know that Bill McDonnell has lots of drawings for us to look at, and so I think it could be useful to pull those things apart.
Smart.
Thank you. I got elected for one reason.
Now you can go home.
I'm good. No, I'm just kidding. No, smart. Yeah, I'm like, I just want to do one. No.
Mission accomplished.
Sure. That was my question on this page. Can we pull it out?
Okay.
Thank you.
No, that's good.
Question from Councillor Payne.
The 350,000 under the 2024 budget for the campground.
Yep.
I don't remember, Sam, I know that there were some challenges with the building. He said it was moving down the
Bubble graph?
bubble graph. Thank you. So is that a proposed?
Yeah, and to winterize it as well. So right now it's not usable in the winter months.
Yeah.
So to make it something that could be there 12 months of the year, which opens some potential for other things. But again, it is in 2024, and I think prior to that, we need to do his capital master plan there, or capital asset plan, to sort of determine, with your assistance, of course, what the priorities are and that sort of thing. But that was one of the thoughts for that building, was to upgrade that. It's in need of something, so.
I
How old
think
is
that-
it? I didn't notice that on the bubble graph. Is that on there?
Campground?
It's been around there it's not a very well-built building in the first place, right? And I think the bigger decision is, is that the long-term place for the campground, or is there a better place in the city for that?
The
That's certainly,
decision will still be a new building. So the 350.
yeah, would we do
matters.
that? Likely that wouldn't happen in 2024 if you looked at a different location, but certainly there would be probably a much larger cost to,
Yeah.
if it
of
was
course,
somewhere else.
grounds.
But obviously the land has a lot of value as well. And, just where it's located with that big bank behind it, you could build pretty high there without, impacting anyone there.
Because 350 is not a new building.
Yeah, I think the idea, it's not a large building, right? It's,
No, it's a very small building.
Sort of
Yeah.
on the same footprint, but you're saying maybe higher.
No,
Oh, well,
she's
I'm just
no,
looking at building
No,
costs
he's
because
talking
I'm trying
about
to
the
build.
value of the campground land,
No, okay.
like
yeah.
to build
Oh,
should be
okay,
venture
got
a
it.
condo.
Okay.
Sorry, should I say that out in, I don't know.
A purpose-built rental building?
Whatever, it could be high, so you could go
Yep,
whatever
I
the
got it.
maximum stories are for the zoning on
I
that
was thinking, what
particular
else would you
property.
put up there?
Yeah, no, not build the building.
Put the campground on top of it.
Okay, I get that.
Get a
So
driver.
similar to what's happening on some of those, okay.
You have to build it to get those RVs to stay up there.
350 for a
Just
building.
depends.
I didn't even know we could do that anymore.
This guy can't.
Might be,
Yeah,
but it's a simple.
Yeah, okay.
placeholder.
I'm going to suggest that the other general capital, that we come back to this one, only because I'm still working with police and fire, which takes up a large portion of this to just sort of figure out where they're at with a few of these things. I think I'll have some better answers for you, and I can kind of work with them a little bit. Fire had some proposed projects in here with some grant funding, and I understand that for one of those, I think they weren't successful in getting the grant, so there's going to be some changes in here. So maybe we can revisit this one.
I know we don't have like a reserve on a building by building basis. Well, but if we're pretty sure that something like, say, the fire hall or the library isn't going to serve our purposes, should we not be setting aside like money in anticipation of something to be done there? Like, it feels like we would continue to keep those options more open, as opposed to always being like, nah, we just can't do it because we're starting from zero.
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly other municipalities have done that. That's how Cascar eventually built their new city hall, because they couldn't get it past that referendum, so they eventually taxed until they had enough money to do it without having to go to referendum. I would put that as a line item in your budget discussions. It would have to come from taxation, and I think you need to see that bigger picture. This year is going to be particularly challenging.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this year is the year to do it, but certainly the concept is a good one. Or the other thing we can look at is our reserves. Do we start to, instead of putting more money into it, we just look at can we claw off a portion of these reserves and put it in a special reserve for future buildings, like a fire hall, like a potential library, and that would be the other strategy. So we'll put it on the list and look at options around how you might be able to do that.
Yeah.
And
Sorry.
I don't know about the rest of council, but for me, I would feel better if we started that practice. Like, I find that certainly with the fire hall, but even the library and these other things where we're feeling like this really aligns with our values. It seems pretty clear to us that something needs to be done. Let's chart a path to making it happen.
So I'll put that on the strategic planning list.
I mean, we saw some interesting,
I got a list. I'm just going for it. I'm nearly out of the page, guys, so.
we saw an interesting photo in Sam's presentation, didn't we, that had the fire hall on the bottom and some housing on the top. And so there's other funding mechanisms perhaps that you could use to make something like that work. Yeah, I think when we get to the operating and we see what the transfers to reserves are and our operating expenses, and I don't know if you have in your mind something that you're thinking would be a reasonable tax increase for 2023, but every 100,000 more that we decide to put in reserves has to come from 1% tax increase. So if it's like, hey, we should be putting 2 or 3 or 400,000 more into the building reserve, that's 4% just for that. So it's going to be a tough year in 2023. I'm hoping 2024 is not, we don't see this kind of inflation and things. And so I've got some, as we get into the reserves, I do have some projected increases. I'm trying to stagger it a little bit so we're not having it all happen in one year. So yeah, it's balanced for sure.
Councillor Payne, followed by Councillor Page.
I'm just interested, I want to understand the language properly, but when you say it's a tough year, so it'll be challenging setting our financial priorities based on the economic environment with the goal of not dramatically increasing taxes to the residents.
Sounds good.
That's excellent.
That sounds good. Okay, we just got, did you go back in and just pull that out? Yeah.
Okay, so that's, that's definition of a tough year. Wanted to make sure I understood
Yep.
it. Got it. Thank you.
Counselor Page?
I know we moved on to the general air, well, my question, we had a conversation around the aerodrome, and its the various pieces of improvements that came out of a report we had a while ago. And I was wondering how far along on that work have we gone over the last couple of weeks? I don't think we've really ever had it come back to us. I see the security gate, the fuel was identified, there's a few other things. Is there still more on that work list?
Some paving there too, right?
Yeah, we did, it was a good question. We had done the runway repair, and so that work's been done, and then there was a bunch of crack sealing that's been done on the runway. The Nelson and District Pilot Society, if I've got that right, had done a bunch of work within the terminal building itself to really kind of give it a nice, some painting and that. I think the piece that was left here it's for the automated gate that goes back and forth. And so, I mean, there's a functional gate that exists there, but the idea is that this would allow it to be something which is accessible with like a fob as opposed to being opened.
Okay.
And that's my recollection as to all that was left on the items that had been flagged. I could go back and look again, but I think this was the last of the remaining kind of list of things that needed to happen.
Okay. And then there was some contemplation at some point that we would have a conversation about even just long-term planning around the aerodrome, and I'm not sure if that's still a salient piece that we feel we still need to have a discussion about when we contemplate what it might look like in 20 or 30 years. Not that I have a particular interest in it going one way or the other, but I do recall conversations around this table that there was a need for the council to discuss it.
And that may come up through your OCP review. It's land use.
Okay.
I would see the discussion there in terms of having the whole community involved, but I can see that Counselor Payne, out of the corner of my eye, is adding that to her list because she's just flipped the page over.
I have a different page for the official plan, so that's
Oh, okay, that's why you flipped the page over.
official
Okay.
community plan over here, strategic planning over here. Got it on. Oops.
Just pulling
Other
it out of
questions,
2 years of
councillors?
conversation.
Further, anything further? Counselor Payne? Page?
Well, I guess just to the chair, like, that's the answer, is we would look to the OCP to flush that further, any more of that conversation.
Well, likely you want to have that community conversation. What did they, the OCP is a long-term plan. What's the long-term vision of the growth of the city? And I think that would be the appropriate place, but certainly, again, you could put it on your priority list if council wants to advance that and get into more detail, and you're probably going to get at the OCP. Certainly, they're not building we're not building a business case for it or whatever, or what could that look like down the road? It's probably pretty high level at the OCP level. What, do they still see that a valuable community asset? And, right now, there's
Do you
Making the
recall
OCP.
what is our current OCP?
I believe it still identifies it as a long-term, land reserve that ultimately would be developed down the road. Certainly I think in the downtown waterfront plan, I think it's the central waterfront lands. Can't remember in there whether it's identified as redevelopment long-term. I think it is.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So now we're on to some reserves. So these are, we've taken all the capital in all those sheets that we looked at before, and now we're kind of looking at it from a different angle here of what do our reserve balances look like. We have our opening balance. We do regular contributions to those reserves. In some cases, in some they're sporadic, like for example, the land sale reserve, we only fund that when we sell land. And there's certain restrictions around some reserves, other that are a little bit more open. So we just kind of thought we'd go through each of these and talk a little bit about them. These are the main ones that we fund our capital with. So the first one here is this water license reserve. And I know we've discussed, should we rebrand this? We have some reserves that are kind of named for the source of the funding and some that are named for the use of the funds. Like I said, the land sale reserve is not, it's funded from land sales. Fortis Reserve was funded from our lease in, lease out agreement with Fortis, but we have other ones like the Equipment Replacement Reserve or the Capital Projects Reserve that are clearly the purpose of the fund. Water License Reserve is one that was the source of the funding. Nelson Hydro, or the city, had negotiated a additional 265 cubic feet per second water license, and so that would reduce Nelson Hydro's power purchases from Fortis, and that savings would come to the city and fund this water license reserve, which would be used for capital projects. I don't know if Kevin, you got any? Good summary there. Okay, good. And the city's always contributed, or for the last little while anyway, $200,000 from operating in addition to that water license payment or savings that flows through Nelson Hydro. The plan in here, I've got an additional $200,000 going into the reserve from Nelson Hydro. As we look at our operating budget a little bit more, if there's room to increase that, I would definitely think that's something we should look at, making that, if it's 300,000 or something a little higher, but I've got it in here at 200, and like I say, it's a work in progress, and once we sort of put the whole thing together and that balance between, tax increases and funding our reserves, we could look to put a little bit more into here. I think that would be, a good strategy.
Hi, Mayor. Could I just say it back to you because it's new for me? So the main contributor of this one is the hydro, the line 14.
Yes.
And that is because we negotiated a higher water license. And so we save money not buying from Fortis, and the savings comes in here.
Correct.
Thank you.
So from this reserve, we're looking to put more into our building reserve to fund some of the capital projects in there. And in addition to that, it does have its own various capital projects that it's funding in 2023. A little bit less in future years, again, just sort of focusing that more on the building side.
Question.
Yes.
So when we talk about the idea of increasing this line 12 from 200 to 300 or 350 as it may be,
Yep.
Can you just refresh my memory where the other 150 is flowing now, or 100 is flowing now?
Yeah, so we do have the dividend from Nelson Hydro, so that's staying in our operating fund
Yeah.
to, reduce pressure on property taxes. Yeah, so again, it's sort of looking at our operating expenses and what we're putting into reserves and that balance with a tax increase. And, if we can keep the tax increase to something reasonable and put more into here, then that might be something we want to do. If we want to, keep it in operating.
Are we getting a sense of where our tax increase might land this year?
Yeah, I think at this point we'll be coming back, the next round of our budget session will be to look at operating. So that's where we'll be able to share kind of what we're seeing right now.
Can we pencil in the 300,000 for at the very least at this point? And
I think
We could show you some different options, I think.
Yeah, I think once we do the operating and you see that, then I think that's a
Yeah.
good time to say, do we want to tax more and shift more funding into this? Yeah, I think you need to see
I think we need to see
the
the
whole
operating
picture.
for sure.
Yeah.
And we're, it's, as I say, it's still a work in progress. We're able to have some further discussions with, some of the protective services and police and kind of look at that as well. And,
yeah, it's just
No,
this
it's-
grand total here.
Yeah.
It's like whether it's this year or next year, it seems to be calling for an additional contribution when you look at the bottom line.
yeah.
Chris and I just had some discussion around, like, we flow quite a bit through with water licensing, and maybe we want to flow some of this directly to, to
Buildings.
buildings,
Yeah.
for example, instead
Yeah.
of having it flow through here and then flow to
Yeah.
the building reserve, and it just creates confusion. So I think we want to look at this.
Yeah.
a little more in totality, and there's no point in putting, for example, Nelson Hydro additional funding in here and then just flowing it to the building reserve. Maybe we should just flow it right to the building reserve and et cetera.
Yeah, I did simplify quite a bit of this from prior years to make it a little more direct and not have it take various steps. But I did try to be consistent with, funding from Nelson Hydro going into water license reserve and then from there other places. But there's room for improvement, simplifying things. But at the end of the day, we're sort of looking at like what's our total reserves, and if it makes a stop in one place before going somewhere else, it's still the same pot of money, right? Yeah.
Are we still on this page?
You want a question?
I don't know if we've gotten down, are we finished with this page yet, or you're still going?
I mean, it's really just a summing up or a summary, I suppose, of where we're at for the capital that you would have seen in all the other sheets, the totals of all of those down below. But any questions you might have, yeah.
I'm following
Yeah.
everything except what is a debt servicing tax?
Yeah. So when we go out and borrow, we often add, not often, but you can add an additional tax, I suppose, that's just to service debt. So, for example, let's say we go out and decide that we need to borrow for the fire truck. So we would say, it's a 4% tax increase plus a 2%, debt servicing tax for a fire truck. So it's sort of a specific purpose of.
So that would appear as a separate line item on the tax bill and for a limited time, or is it?
Yeah, until the debt's paid off. Yeah.
And when it appears on the tax bill, is it communicated to the community what the term of that is, or?
It's a way to sort of separate out that tax increase to say this is just for operations, but this is specific for borrowing. Yeah.
Okay. I'll go home and look at my tax bill. Thank you.
Okay. The next one is the Community Works Fund. So this one used to be called the gas tax, I guess, and it's federal funds that come in through to UBCM, which then comes to us, and it's a fixed amount. I believe the current agreement ends in 2024, and so we will see what the new funding amounts are in 2025 and beyond. I've just put them in here as status quo. I would, unlikely they would go down, but that's kind of what we got in here.
So
And
just for the couple of new people here, so this is, although it says there in the line UBCM, so this is federal money, and we never get federal money directly. Federal money always flows back through the province, in which case it always flows through UBCM, and then out to us. So lots of people, I hear them, oh yeah, and you get all that money from the province. No, this money is federal money. It's just the way that it has to flow through, in part probably because municipal governments aren't real entities. Anyhow, that's where that comes from. And the other thing is that this has been of great value to us, and that in the one of the years of the pandemic, the federal government upped the ante and doubled it to every community that was getting it. So we did well in 2020, I forget which year it was, either 2020 or 2021. We saw the doubling of the gas tax, which I think benefited many, many communities that were really struggling. And of course, we put the money to good use here in the city of Nelson.
And when we do report on the gas tax each year, they do ask us what our intentions are for spending the money. So it isn't, they're not looking for us to stockpile this. The intent is it comes in and we use it. So as the mayor was saying, we did get a sort of a bonus payment during COVID there, which did increase the amount we had in our reserve. But, we try to use, there's certain restrictions on what we can and can't use it for. Like we couldn't use it to do anything to a city hall, for example, or a public works yard. It has to be a public building, like a community center or a sports arena, things like that. Roads are okay, paving. So there's some restrictions. It's,
It's gotten better. It was
Yeah.
very restricted when it
Yeah.
first came out, very restricted, and now they've loosened the reins a little bit, so.
Yeah.
Could you briefly tell me how UBCM decides how much we get? Is it per capita, or how does that look?
Yeah, it's a formula based on per capita, like,
Yeah,
yeah,
ish.
population. Yeah, I think there's a base amount plus some sort of population.
Smaller communities get this base amount, and
Yep.
then per capita, so if you're a Silverton, you get more than we would get per capita, or we get more than Vancouver would get per capita.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Next, we talked about the equipment replacement reserve. I do have in here, our equipment charges, looking over the next, 4, 5 years here to increasing that, and primarily through fire, having them contribute a little bit more, but also just doing a holistic kind of evaluation. And we do that periodically to look at various departments and the pieces of equipment and what the charge out amounts are, what the replacements are on those vehicles, and make sure we're recovering enough on each vehicle to be able to replace it. So we'll kind of reevaluate that. And but I think it's been that 900,000 level for a little bit here, and I think we need to, the cost of maintaining vehicles is going up, fuel costs are going up, so we need to make sure we're not only recovering our operating costs, but also putting enough in there to replace these vehicles. So I've got some forecasts in here to increase that over time.
Hi.
Question?
May I go again?
Sure.
So I'm just learning, right? So on we have the fire truck on page 7, and it comes 2.3 million in 2026.
Yep.
And then if I go farther down the page, that 2.3 million looks like it's coming out of borrowing.
Yes.
Okay. And so then even when we go here on the page that we're on, page 12, fire equipment, that's why there's no 2.3 million in here anywhere.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Yep. So rather than have it, in the reserve, it's being funded initially through borrowing. And you can see on line 19 here of page 12, where it says debt repayment. That's when we start to repay the debt. So we've got 230,000 a year coming out to repay that debt.
Gotcha. Comes out of the equipment replacement reserve.
Because the idea is that it is self-sufficient, so we'll need enough coming in to pay that debt off over the life of the vehicle.
And that 230,000 would not be that hourly charge on the fire truck.
That should theoretically be added to what fire is
Oh, okay.
being charged on an annual basis, because they would be replacing this vehicle, right?
So theoretically,
Yeah.
that is the hourly charge.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Thank
Well,
you.
we don't charge them per
Consider it
hour.
the mortgage on the
Yeah.
fire truck.
Yes, yeah, we charge them
Or,
an annual
more the way I
amount.
look at it is
Yeah.
the 230 is the mortgage on the fire truck.
Yeah.
That theoretically gets paid by the hourly charge.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And if I may, to be clear, the interest income is, so we get more in interest from that reserve than we would expect to pay in interest on the loan. Otherwise, why not just buy the whole thing out of the reserve?
We'd have to get those reserve balances up quite a bit if we were going to be able to make that by 2026. So now we're charging more in property tax.
Well, no, hold on,
Yep.
sorry, then this is, I'm not
Sure.
understanding. So according to this here, we've got 2026, we got 1.246 million in the reserve. We're not sort of spending all that down on the fire truck
Correct.
because we're making more in interest on that reserve than we would be paying in interest on the debt in the following year.
Yeah, it's a good point. How much are we making in interest? We make, the way the repayments for MFA work is that and remember I had the presentation there from them, is that we pay into debt reserve funds that they then earn interest on that, plus we keep balances in our equipment replacement reserve that will earn a rate of return, which is higher than the other. It really depends on what we're putting those reserves into. We have some in a mortgage fund, which is giving us a pretty good yield of, I think 5% is what we were at last time. So,
But to be clear,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
from my understanding,
Sure.
the rationale in not using the reserve to pay off, because we have the room, We're not using that
Yeah.
to buy the fire truck because,
Well, we don't. In
another reason.
2026, if I were to put a $2.2 million additional equipment purchase in there, that reserve was negative, right?
sure, so
Yeah.
let's say 875. Why not, I
Yeah.
just want to understand, why not just spend off the reserve?
And why not drop it down to zero?
Yeah. If we're going to
Yeah,
be borrowing anyways.
don't borrow as much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could do that. You could limit the amount of borrowing. I mean, I'm never comfortable taking a reserve to zero.
Is it just because we're hedging on some future that we can't access
Well,
borrowing from MFA?
You suddenly need to borrow. You suddenly need to replace a hydro vehicle, for example, or a Vector truck, or something that has some value to it. We heard from MFA it takes a year to borrow. So
see.
what are you doing in
I
that
see.
meantime?
So
Maybe
that's
you don't
it.
have enough
That's-
money in the reserve.
That's
Yeah.
the reason.
Yeah,
Not,
I mean,
not the discrepancy in
I think you
interest,
always
but
want to have something in here for those types of circumstances that you're not going
It's-
out.
the flexibility to move quick
Yeah,
if you have to
for
buy
sure.
something. Got it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And if we think about, and I'm sure Councillor Payne would give this example, is that when you think about your own home situation, is that you're supposed to have that emergency fund available of 6 months of your household expenses as you should have in the bank at all times for when the, roof falls in or the hot water tank blows up. And I think that's the same way. I mean, at least that's the way I look at reserves. I wouldn't want to see a reserve go to zero for perhaps a marginal gain over time, particularly when we have such favorable ability due to the fact that we have the MFA to actually borrow money and be able to pay it off in reasonable terms. So there's a time when debt is good, and then there's the time when debt is bad. And so I think that these investments in things that we need to operate the city appropriately, that we need to have reserves.
Yeah. Yeah. Just and to be clear, from my understanding, a year to borrow something, that's the limiting factor here. You want to move quick sometimes, and we wouldn't have the room to move quick. We have to wait a year to replace the garbage truck that just blew up or something.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we don't have instant access to long-term borrowing. But having said that, before we go out and borrow, we'll look at, does it make sense for us to borrow now with, higher interest rates, and if they're bringing inflation down and those rates will be cheaper in a year's time, we might carry that for a year on short term. And
I was gonna say it's the flip side of that, isn't it? Is that we might need the piece of equipment, and because it does take a year, so we have the catastrophic whatever, and we don't have enough in reserves, and it's gonna take a year to borrow. We also have to look at what we can do in the short term as well, and we always have the capacity to do that. And I know at the RD, particularly when they're doing some long-term borrowing, oftentimes the repayment doesn't even have to start then for another year after that. So you get time to build reserves or to look at how you're gonna move some money around, because sometimes that payment doesn't start till even a bit further out.
So, sorry.
Yeah,
I
no.
guess we could have kind of a similar conversation about the civic center, because we know it's gonna cost a lot, and it looks like, so I'm going back again, sorry, page 8. So in 2023, it's 2.8 million and 1.26 borrowing, like 2.8 million and 1.26 borrowing.
Yeah.
So some of it we are paying for
We have
out of
a
our
grant
reserves.
for some of that as well.
And does the grant require that you chip in a bunch of your own money? Just curious. Usually, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
Usually always.
Usually
you get
always,
a
yeah.
grant and that they expect you to have
It's a-
some matching money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I see. Grant check with Terry, or is that a different grant? Grant FCM.
I left that in there, didn't I?
That's okay. I sometimes say silly things too. We're all doing the best we can.
That's for something different. That's for the youth center, but yeah.
Awesome. This
Terry,
is
if you're
really
listening, I'll be checking with you on it.
helpful. Yeah, this is really helpful. Thank you for indulging our pull it apart questions that you just have baseline understanding.
Yeah.
It's simple and
This
common.
is why we're here, is
Yeah.
so that you ask all the questions, and there's no such thing as a silly question. Sometimes there's an answer that you don't want to hear, but there's no such thing as a silly question.
Okay, so we're back to 12.
Yeah.
Be on to the next.
Okay, next one is our capital projects reserve. Sorry, going on to page 13, if that's okay. So this reserve is funded through our parking revenues. And it's primarily for, transportation improvements, roads, sidewalks, things like that. So we put funds that we make from our parking meters into here. We'd be looking to increase this over the next coming years. Again, just, funding of transportation is more and more expensive. And we'll be looking at bringing to council some options and some thoughts on, electronic parking, extending our areas of parking. Do we extend the hours for parking, days for parking, that type of thing? So we'll kind of put something together here in the coming months and kind of present some thoughts and ideas and been.
And if I may,
Sure.
Mayor, like, in the hunt for revenue, like, I'd rather do increasing parking meters than tax increase.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, and you can see that's built into here too, to kind of look at that. To try and, look at some other solutions and things too. And I really like the electronic parking options, and just last week I may have mentioned with a parking vendor. So we'll kind of continue those conversations and look at some other choices and options. There's a few suppliers out there, so find something that works for us.
Don't go yet.
Counselor Payne.
So, line 9, my favorite, debt servicing tax
Yes.
in 2025. So we're borrowing a significant amount there. Do we know, was that presented in another
So-
thing that I'm just not connecting?
So that was part of the storm grant project. So we would be potentially obtaining some grant funds and then borrowing for the residual portion of that.
Perfect.
And then with that, is that the time to kind of create a storm utility, but there would be some additional revenue that would be needed to support that?
Awesome, thanks.
I have a comment.
Yep.
We've had a conversation about this, I think, before. What I like about parking revenue is that it captures visitors as well who come and
Yeah.
use our parks, and it's just like a low level way to say thanks for letting us use all your super beautiful places and spaces. But what I do notice is that, unfortunately, I know it's all reserves and it all gets shuffled around, but like the parks and stuff aren't coming out of this particular reserve, which is fine because I know it's all different pockets, but it would be good to be able to draw those direct lines for people,
Yeah.
maybe in future.
Yeah, I think maybe the philosophy behind it was, the vehicles are the ones putting the wear and tear on the roads. So then the coin goes into fund the replacement of those roads. So
Yeah.
there was that sort of connection.
That's fair.
And, thinking of it in maybe bigger picture with the active transportation side as well, that, is it just roads or should it be also funding, bikes and those types of routes as well, right? So, yeah.
Thank you.
Mayor?
Yes, Counselor Payne.
So that was the question that I was going to ask, because the reserve was set aside by council for yada yada, and that this is one place where we could generate revenue for active transportation. So does that mean we need to go back and review the setup of this reserve?
No. What you
Okay.
would be doing was you'd be asking for the policy on how much we put into the parking meters to come back to us. It's
Okay.
not about how we set up the reserve. The reserve is there.
Okay.
It's about how do you get more revenue into the reserve? And so one of the things would be increased parking meter fees, increasing parking areas. That's why where the electronic parking comes in. So then suddenly we are charging for you to park along the fence by the airport, and you'll have a electronic method to do that. So the reserve is, when you're looking at a reserve, I think it's fair to say that you're always looking at where do we find more money to put into the reserve and what ways do you have to do it. And basically the city has two ways. One, user fees. Two, taxation. And is there a third one?
User fees and taxation. Own revenues like
Wow.
generate.
Rats. I don't like to think of a grant because that's not a certainty, but I mean.
But we lease buildings, we do all
There's some other
sorts
ways
of
that we
things.
have, but it's pretty much the way we get money is user fees and taxation.
So we don't have to name it. When
Well, I
the
would
reserve
say-
is set up for a certain thing and we want to add another thing, there's not a process where we have to name active
Potentially,
transportation.
depending. I would say street construction includes
Includes.
bike
active-
lanes,
perfect.
sidewalks,
That's what I thought it
curbs,
might fall
all
under as
those
well.
things. So I think it's broad enough to,
Yeah.
we just
it.
need to broaden how we utilize it.
As long as we
Yeah.
all share that understanding, then that's how that would work.
Yeah, I would say it's more on the, where's your priority spending? You know,
Perfect.
This is where the revenue's coming from. It's in this reserve. It's how you choose to spend that
And how the
reserve.
balance of the streetscape looks.
Yeah,
Where we
exactly.
spend the money.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Land sale reserve. So this is a statutory reserve, so we're required that when we sell land, the proceeds of that sale go into a land sale reserve. And that land sale reserve can be used for the purchase of other land or to improvements on land. So whether that's a building or in this case, we're using some of it to finish the pier, for example. We don't have any annual funding source. It's really dependent on, that's why I put a couple red question marks in there. You know, will we sell some more land in 2023 and 2024 or beyond? It's probable, but just kind of left it at that sort of question mark at this point until we know for certain.
Question from Councillor Payne, and I think Councillor Lockenberg's just stretching.
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought I had heard at a previous meeting, and I don't know under what context, so I won't name the property, that there was a disposition of a piece of real estate. So wouldn't that show on here, or is that just not a completed sale yet?
You mean on Hall Street?
Pardon?
What's that? Coming in? Oh, okay, in 2023, yeah. 2022. Okay, there you go. In December,
You're
yes. we
correct.
did
Just
have
found money.
Additional 96,000 come in.
We sold some land
Yeah.
and that has.
So we can say where it is? I can't remember where we are.
Yeah, those are the
The
streets
government
on,
road one?
on Railway, or, Railway Street.
Oh,
The
really?
little houses.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, coming down to,
By
from
Cotton.
the highway down, yeah, okay.
Right across from
96,000.
Cottonwood
So that should be in there then? Is that
Yeah.
right?
That would go in 2022
Right.
as a projected. So you'll have another 96,000 in there.
Okay, under.
Oh yeah, that's years ago though. Oh, we haven't sold the house. Which part are you talking about?
The to
205?
to Finley's, a little piece of land to Finley's.
Oh, the little piece of land to,
Yeah,
right, we put that through too.
that was sold
Yeah.
as well, right?
Yeah, it's a work in progress.
Yeah,
As we
I
do our
imagine that's
year end
probably
and
not-
kind of look at those
No,
proceeds
just-
from land sale, we'll fill in
Because
those
we didn't
gaps.
pass
I
that
just
until late
want-
last year, so it's probably not
Yeah.
finished yet.
Found more money.
Just trying to make sure I understand
When
the
you say
flow
Wall
and.
Street, I remember when, if they actually live on Vernon Street, I
connecting my
remember people
dots.
phoning
catch.
going, what are you selling on Vernon Street?
because we had a land or a street closure. or
Street
something too.
closure, gosh.
Right, right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Can I ask actually a question about the land sale reserve? So you said it can also be used to fund buildings, so that's it does-
improvements on land, yeah,
improvements on land,
yeah.
including the
Couldn't
buildings.
buy a piece of equipment with it, for example.
Right.
Yeah.
So we could do work here.
Oh,
we could
yeah.
do work on any of our buildings. It doesn't. Doesn't have to be any attachment to which building we're.
No, I mean, I think the direct,
Yeah.
like, provision taken out of the, I think it's the community charter, that it's for land improvements and other capital assets. So it is
Oh,
the
it's
other
pretty broad.
capital assets is a little bit,
Of the city.
yeah, yeah.
So roads, sidewalks.
That would be a capital, yeah.
Okay. Okay. That's pretty
transportation.
broad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. Good.
So this could also be active transfer.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, there's not a lot of money there, so I mean, that's the whole thing, it's so dependent
Yeah,
on what comes in, so it's
Yeah.
a very
Yeah.
small
No.
Not a system, yeah, not
reserve,
an
but when you
annual
ask
type
about
thing, but.
this building, yeah, it could be used for,
Yeah.
Our resource recovery reserve was a new one, but we had, it wasn't a new one, but we utilized it in 2022 here to use it as that sort of ongoing funding source for the food cycler project. You know, if that advances, we would fund that through the fees we generate from resource recovery, which would then, you know, fund the replacement, of those food cycler units. We have some internal borrowing in here where we would, this, not to overcomplicate things, but borrow from our own Fortis reserve and then repay that. So long-term, we'd be looking at the resource recovery reserve being self-sufficient in that replacements of food cycler units would be covered under this resource recovery reserve.
Mayor, if I may?
Yes.
So that jump of 150,000 or so, 160,000 is 2023 to 2024?
Where's that, sorry?
The resource recovery
Yep.
jump? I just don't understand, you're saying where is that coming from?
So the, are you talking about line 11 there?
Yeah,
Yep, in 2024?
yeah.
Yeah, so that would be, if we move forward with the food cycler program, we would have to generate more fees from our resource recovery fee, and then that would go into this reserve to help repay
Okay.
the food cycler.
So you're anticipating that we increase,
I'm anticipating that
Ag.
if we went with a phase 2 of the food cycle program, we would need to increase the fees in order to make that sustainable.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I recall it went from like 100 to 120 to 160 on that line in the,
right,
I recall Councillor Pinheiro pointing it out.
yeah, right, okay.
Councillor Payne.
So, sorry, I thought I heard you say replacement of the food cyclers, which is
Yeah.
down, but it is replacement, it's not the continuation of the project.
So we would, if we did a phase 2 at the end of this year, we would go out and purchase the remaining food cycler units. But, you know, they have a
life.
7-year warranty on them. So at the end of 7 years, you would want to be in a position where this reserve in itself could replace those as they wear out or as they need to be
So
replaced,
replace
as there's no
the
warranty.
entire
Yeah.
city
Correct,
inventory of them,
yeah.
which
So-
would be a significant number in 7 years, or has that cost already been determined?
We did phase 1 in 2022, so the phase 2 would be, I think if you look down that line 29, other general capital, so that would be the purchase in 2023 of 1.4 million to do that remaining food cycler purchase.
Okay, and part of that is grant funding?
And we didn't have grants now for that. I mean, it's always a potential to look for that sort of thing. We did in 2022 for the first round. We had a few different grant sources. But it's definitely something we should look into.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Are we for time here with
You're doing well. You're doing well.
40? All right, great. And here's that other side of the internal borrowing for the food cyclers. So this Fortis reserve was, and I may need to look to Kevin to help with the LILO that we had with Fortis on how this was created back in the day. But there was a, and you can jump in if I mess this up, but or just
It's over now, so just splurt it out. I mean, it's.
the idea is
Universal.
we bought the natural gas infrastructure from Fortis and they leased it back to us over a period of time. They terminated that agreement in 2021, I believe, and that brought in some additional funding to fund this reserve. We'd be using that temporarily to do some internal borrowing for food cycler units and then repay that, as I mentioned, over that 7 years so that our resource recovery reserve has enough to keep itself going.
Probably, this is an example where Nelson is innovative community, so we basically used the city at one time had this, we had this agreement that said we had the right to buy this utility back at a somewhat undetermined cost, and Fortis wanted that out of the agreement, and we negotiated that out by doing this lease in, lease out. It generated significant revenues for the city. We used it to buy this building. As an example, help give the $1 million to Touchstones to buy that building. And the way I financed this in the time, we actually generated additional about $2 million on top of what the original deal is, because I stayed short-term instead of locking it in long-term. But it's a one-off. It's done now, and this is kind of the last part of that legacy of doing that deal.
Well, let me tell you, you thought the stuff that you're listening to now was confusing as a counselor? The Lilo was, it was an interesting process to go through, but it was worth every penny that we got, so.
Nice.
And it was initially turned down by the electorate. When I got here, we restructured it so that there was more upfront benefits. That's how we
Yeah.
did the NDCC. The Touchstones Museum bought this building and created those revenues up front to be able to purchase this with basically cash and the leases that we did on this, and then create this long-term benefit as well. Because originally it was structured, you get the whole benefit at the end of 17 years, which back 18 years ago seemed like a long time to me, but apparently it wasn't. Because it's come and gone.
Yeah, I was gonna say, quit reminding us that we've all been here that long, Kevin, thank you. Oh, yes.
Okay.
No.
So next is our building reserve, which is kind of self-explanatory. We make annual contributions into that reserve. We also take the surplus or that we generate from this building here, 310 Ward, to put into that reserve. And as noted when we talked about the water license reserve, using that as a funding source for the work on our facilities that will be required in the coming years. And again, we'll have kind of a better picture of what that looks like and where the priorities are after we get through this asset management plan in 2023.
So, Chris, on this one,
Yeah.
I have a question.
Oh,
Are we anticipating that we're actually going to put a debt servicing tax on this? Because I see a line item there.
yeah. And when I say debt servicing tax, don't mean that it is a separate line, but we would need some additional revenues, whether it's from tax or operating contribution is, coming from tax or something, but that something to offset the debt cost. So we'd need an additional $300,000 a year starting in 2026 if we went with that library project to fund the debt. So whether that's increasing our annual contribution or more revenue from 310 Ward or something to service that debt.
Yeah, so just for when you're reading these spreadsheets, so something that's in brackets is costs, so that's money coming out, and that would be actually those debt service costs. And something in positive is actually new coming in, so that's additional taxation. At this stage, that's how it's anticipated.
And if I may, Mayor, the term debt servicing tax, is that an accounting term, or is this like?
I mean, it could be like we talked about earlier, like a separate tax that's just to cover the debt, or, we can structure it in a different way and just say, hey, we need another $300,000 in taxation to pay for this debt. Or as, when we get to that point, are there some other things we can do, like with this building, to generate more revenue to offset that? So, we've got a bit of time to think about how that works. And it is for the library project, which, may turn out one way or another, or there's other things we can do. But we do need some sort of revenue source to kind of offset that debt payment. Yeah.
Counselor Payne?
So I think, yeah, just to finish that, so I think the message there is current taxation would not be able to fund the debt service, even if you went out and borrowed. Because not only do you have to pay the interest, you have to pay the
Principal.
The principal, so that's what debt service is, both the interest and the principal on those, and even if we went out and borrowed on a project like that, we would still need to figure out how we would fund that debt service.
Councillor Payne.
Probably not as quick on the calculator as Councillor Tate, but I see a pretty significant interest income jump in 2023, and I don't,
What line are you on, please?
line 7, interest income,
Okay, thank you.
goes way up and then comes down again, and I see that the reserve balance does go up and then come down again, but it doesn't seem at the same
Yeah.
proportion, so where am I not?
It's just based on a 2% of the opening balance of the reserve as being
Okay.
interest income. You know,
2022 wrong then, is it 1,700 on?
Yeah,
it's
That's
What I
27.
mean, to go
That-
from
that's what was-
1,700 on 950 to 27,000 on 13.
that's what was in the budget originally. When I'm looking at this, I kind of adjusted a little bit from
Okay.
2023 onwards of saying,
That makes sense.
you know, 2% of an opening balance would,
17,000.
what's that?
Probably should have been 17,000.
Yeah, that's what was in
Yeah.
the budget. so.
Okay, that's,
And, you know, right now I just have as projected equal to the budget because we haven't kind of reconciled our December. It's going to be more than $1,700.
I see that, I just couldn't connect
Yeah.
it from, okay, thank you, 2%.
And Chris, to be clear, this, setting aside this debt for the library is anticipation of the new library?
Correct. Yeah.
With a large grant.
With what?
With a large grant.
Yeah.
With the large grant.
Yeah.
And so wouldn't we do something like this for the fire department, or is the idea with the fire department that we're more likely to sell the current fire department and that would finance?
Yeah, well, we talked about that. Is it a library? Is it a fire hall? Is it both? Is it neither? Like, there's, a lot of decisions need to be made on that, and I think things will become clearer this year. This was on here as a project, and we had gone out for a grant, and we're not successful, and it's on here still.
Okay, that
Yeah.
explains.
That's
We
why
don't-
it's way
we
out
really
there.
don't have a-
So we don't really have a plan at this point, but that's why 2026, so it's just there when you're looking that you can have a reminder that that project is there. And I think too that, in terms of, I mean, it's like, it's always seems like we have to make these decisions about either or whatever, but who knows how you mash it all together. But in terms of, fire, like the buildings like the fire, I think there's oftentimes easier granting sources, if I'm not mistaken, to offset when you're going out to do that kind of life safety. Not that a library isn't important, but I think that there's more granting mechanisms for fire halls under different streams than there would be, say, for a library.
Right.
Both very equally important to our city, but we're not the ones that make the decision about how money gets dispensed. Councillor Page.
Would it not be right, though, as a budgetarian exercise, to assume that we don't necessarily get the grant, that it's going to be borrowing, and then obviously pursue the grant and chase the grant, and if we do get the grant, that's amazing, that's great. But then as we plot out these 5-year plans that we anticipate we'll have to go to borrowing for these things that we know we must, or we agree we should be doing.
Well, and that's the whole thing about, that's the point of a strategic plan, right, is to discuss where these things fall on, say, our priority list, but even probably more important, as you referred to a number of times the other day, looking at what the OCP is and what does the community want in terms of investment going out long-term, because we can do these exercises and try to plot them all and keep our city staff extremely busy trying to work through doing those kinds of numbers, or as we hone down what numbers we really want them to be looking at,
Right.
we save them a little bit of time, because, I mean, who doesn't want a new library? Who doesn't want a new fire hall? Who doesn't want a new recreation center? These guys could be busy. We'd be buying we'd have to have a new line item for calculators.
Well, fortunately, the rec center's on the RDCK budget.
So, Yeah, so I think that's why we have these discussions like strategic planning, and also why we have those OCP reviews, and thankfully they're not every year OCP reviews, but, every 5 to 7 years, because of the fact that then you can start that planning cycle again and be looking out at what the long-term
No, that was my
vision
question.
is. Back to staff.
Yeah. Kind of a smaller one, but this is an interesting one as far as the funding, I suppose, is that we have additional parking meter revenues. This one was funded back in the day when HST came in and then disappeared again. So we were losing a little bit of revenue when HST came in. When it went back to GST, we had additional revenue, and the thought was, let's take that additional revenue from the savings we have of not having to pay it in GST and fund our downtown and waterfront reserve. So from this comes that capital section that we looked at, which was the downtown waterfront capital. Hopefully that made sense.
I don't think the public recognizes that when we, the parking meter revenue we collect, part of that is deemed PST, which we submit to the province on that, so that we don't charge a buck plus
Yeah.
5% or whatever it is. These days, that buck, we only get 95% of that.
Correct. Yeah.
Another way we're funding the province.
And then the last one on here is not a reserve, but it's just summarizing what we would have in here for new borrowing. So, we talked about the fire truck. If we get the grant for the storm infrastructure upgrades, we've got the civic center project, and we talked about library, fire hall, something in 2025 and beyond. So, and then down below is what the annual debt payments would be on that, and I just used what MFA currently is projecting for 20-year borrowing on that amount of principal. I did notice they came down slightly over the last month or so, which is good. As we get closer to these dates, those numbers may come down. I can't forecast that, of course, but I was happy to see that they had come down a little bit from their peak of a month or so ago. So, yeah, we've kind of used these debt payments in our previous slides there in each of those reserves.
So just to be clear, I did hear you say.
Yeah.
So this is debt repayment over 20 years.
Correct, 20 years, yep.
So it'd be a 10 and 2 5s.
Yep.
Okay.
And I think what we might look to do in the short term here is actually bring to council a borrowing bylaw that would have some, just based on the lead time that's required to go through all of this, I think it might be preferable if we get something in place now, a borrowing bylaw that we can send into the province and sort of get that ball rolling before we actually go to MFA, but just to kind of get the process started here so that we're not, at a position where we still need to look a year ahead.
And are we not doing a borrowing bylaw for the Civic? Is that not coming to us shortly?
Yes, correct. Yeah, we'll do that.
Are we doing an additional one?
No, that's that one.
Oh, that is the one.
But and we talked about it a little bit, Kevin and I, is there, should we be kind of rolling a few of these into one rather than just doing a one-off? Should I think we already did one for the storm infrastructure, and that was part of the grant requirement, I think, is that maybe we have that. So maybe we can kind of amalgamate those. Could we look to add one or two of these other things and then just kind of get that in front of the province earlier so they can review that? Yeah.
I got it. Councillor Page.
So, just so I understand the mechanics, we haven't gone through this before. I don't believe, anyway. I can't recall during the last term, but we would. Sorry?
I don't think on your turn,
No.
So we would take the aspirations to do the borrowing, put it into a bylaw. Do we have to go to voters?
No.
For
Yeah.
this?
Oh.
It depends on how much you're going to borrow. Yeah, well, there's a cent-free zone, it's called, which I think is 5, if your debt payments are 5% or below of your recurring revenues, then you don't need to go to the electorate. So, we don't have a lot of borrowing right now. If we can find what that threshold is, I think it's around 10, 11, 12, something in there. I have to check what it is currently. Last time I checked, it was kind of around there, but rates were a little lower when I went and inquired about that at last time.
Okay.
So if you kind of keep it below that threshold, and I think you'd go out for 3 readings and then send it in. So you wouldn't adopt the bylaw yet, but you'd send it in to the province. So at least they have that information. They have your capital plan. They are able to calculate what your thresholds are,
Right.
and then, approve or ask some questions or whatnot.
Okay, thanks.
So that's our recommendation, is just use that assent-free room. Council's, approved this deep retrofit on the civic arena. We're well into the design, or starting into the design stage. We got the grant, so, but ultimately that's up to council. If you want to go to voter assent, then that's a larger process.
I love it now, I've heard it twice. And so we're gonna call this bylaw procedure assent-free room. That's what I keep hearing, that there's no scent in the room.
Smells
So
like
it was like,
flowers.
it was like when you said, I was like, a scent-free room, and then when I heard Evan say, I heard the exact same thing. So
I think there's a poster.
what it means
in
is
the-
that we
yeah.
do not have to go to the electorate, just for all the people that think that we're gonna do better HVAC work in the building, is that we don't have to go to the public to ask to borrow this money. There's a certain level that we can borrow because of the fact that we keep our books in good order. We're not excessive borrowers. We're not carrying a lot of debt on the city books, and so we do have room to be able to borrow. In other cases, depending on the amount of borrowing, we would have to go through the processes that are there, either AAP or the R word that I always get the wrong word,
Referendum.
referendum. Thank you. So, along with the assent-free room
Yes.
in the budget.
And this
So assent,
asset.
Yes.
the consent type of area there,
Yeah.
but ASSENT, okay.
Yes. Yes.
And, yeah, it's called an alternative approval process if you want to, that you can get voter assent through that process, which means the public has the right to get a petition with at least 10% of the electorate to say you have to take this to referendum if you want to borrow.
So that's the end of this presentation. I think timing's pretty good here. Look at that, 2:59.
Yes, exactly. So if there's no other questions, we'll take a little break now while we wait for Mr. Stanley to come and join us. And then we'll have a short session regarding the Hall Street Pier update. Housing, which is changing like you change your underwear kind of thing. I mean, social housing is definitely housing
Did you
that
find
comes
anything?
with funding, which would come from
Sarah?
BC Housing.
Carmen.
Affordable is a bit of a dangerous road to go
Sarah.
down even with as they
Completely.
flux, so
Resource recovery?
non-market.
Chris, his
Yeah.
numbers.
Yeah, no, that's what I mean, I'm trying to shift myself.
And now they've kind of gone back to the missing middle. What the hell is that? I'm like, I've been trying to miss my middle for like the last 25 years, and it's.
Well, if you
someone
figure
keeps
that,
reoccurring.
Embrace the
let me know.
trunk, embrace the chunk.
And Grace.
Okay, everybody, if we're ready, we have,
The chunk.
I don't see him in the little square anywhere,
Shine him in
Yeah.
the
but
middle.
No, that's what I mean, when you look at
there he is.
When you think
Liz-
So,
I'll die
We're
first
going
in the
up.
for
family.
those of you who don't know
Why?
Matt Stanley,
In the-
that would be the new people, which would be
which way should we
Kate
look to
and
say hi to Matt? That way, okay.
Tate and Leslie
Gonna
Payne
fix
are the
this.
two
Fix
new
it.
partners that you've never met, I don't think, yet, Matt. Councillor Woodward, who you've known from the past, is unwell
Yes.
today. And Councillor
Okay.
Caro is trying to bring pride to British Columbia and has his BC boxing team at the Nationals in Toronto. So
Awesome.
you have 4 of us here for an update, and we had a
Okay.
little lottery thing, and and that everybody was trying to think that maybe they'd get home by 3:30, but we'll see what happens, that we'd wind up at 3:30, but we'll see where life takes us with the questions. So
That
I
is not
think,
gonna
Okay.
Colin, did you want to do an introduction, or do you just want to turn it over to Matt right away?
Well, I think Matt has a little presentation here, and I thought that we'd do that. And then I didn't really have a structured conversation, so I think we might as well let Matt take off here, and then we'll answer some questions.
There you go. All yours, Matt.
Okay, great. Thanks, and nice to meet the new counselors. I know that many of you there are quite familiar with this project, and maybe a couple of you are a little less familiar. So I really appreciate being given the opportunity to give you an update today. I am representing a much larger group of consultants who are working really hard on this project for the city. And we are really pleased to see it moving forward. There's a lot of good progress on site. When you go down to the site now, it's a very different looking place than it was a year ago. So we're really excited to see the progress on site and to see it moving forward on site. And we are pleased to see it moving forward in the 2023 city budget. And we are also really pleased to see a commitment to the canopy portion of this project in the 2024 budget. And that's partly what I wanted to chat about with you today. Is the canopy is a critical part of this project. It's critical to the overall success and the successful completion of this project. It's the gesture that will draw people to the area. It's the landmark that will connect Baker Street and Hall Street down to the waterfront. It has that scale and that ability to connect and to draw people to the area. And this connection between the city's downtown, between Baker Street and to our waterfront, that is something that is bigger than this project. That is something that has been in city planning policies and city planning priorities for many, many, many years. Especially it is one of the priorities, or one of the first priorities, in the Sustainable Waterfront and Downtown Master Plan. It was a motivation behind a lot of the work at Hall Street and the Stores to Shores and other planning initiatives. And so this idea of this connection between Baker Street and our waterfront, or our downtown and our waterfront, it's an incredibly important aspect of this project. And that is what is addressed in those first two. I'm not sure what order you have images in, but we've got two sheets that you may be looking at where we're talking about the broader moves of the project.
So
You want to share your screen there, Matt? Could that be a way to do it?
Sure.
We can sort of see what
Yeah,
you're-
maybe
Yeah.
maybe we could do that. I'm not a
we don't
WebEx
have that
pro.
here. I don't have it.
It's on
Oh,
the
okay.
agenda.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it's on
Okay,
there.
so the two images, yeah, I got that down. Well,
It's going to be challenging for me to share my screen. It's asking
Okay,
me
well,
to
we
change.
can look at it.
We can do it.
Okay, yeah, I won't. I don't want to screw up the 3:30 goal.
We're never gonna make that,
Oh,
let's
it's
be
okay, we're
honest.
not gonna make it, but it's just always it's good for a giggle.
Well, let's keep it in our minds, 3:30.
let's keep it as a goal. And so, the vision for the space and the vision for the project
There we
is
go.
that locals and tourists are drawn to the area. There are families, there are weddings, there's events, and there's gatherings, and it's a place. There we go. You can see it on. Oh, perfect. Okay, and maybe if
You just tell me
yeah,
what you want me to turn
go to the
page.
next. Maybe the next one.
Next page, Matthew?
Yes, please. There you go. So that's, this is what we were alluding to, this part of this connection between downtown and the waterfront, and the ability for this project, and especially the canopy at its scale, to draw people to this area. And so if you go to the next slide, the vision for the space is that locals and tourists are being drawn to this area, down to this particular site from Baker Street. And there's families, there's weddings, there's events, there's gatherings. And it's a place where people can connect to the water by the swimming area and the floating docks and the pier itself. It's a place where people can connect to our history, our heritage, and our culture. And that's happening at the Ladybird display. And it's also a place where people are connecting to each other and to the community. And where that is happening is at this canopy. The canopy is the event space, it's the gathering space, the sheltering space, and it's that iconic landmark that is drawing people to the area. And so the successful completion of this project depends on this sort of critical mass of public amenity, the swimming area, the heritage area, the gathering space, the event space. It's that combination of all those scopes of the work that will draw people to this area throughout the day, in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, different times of the week, different seasons throughout the year. And that is really what will make for a successful project and a successful public space for the city. And we are almost there. As I said, there's really great progress happening on site. There's grant money, that is a significant amount of grant money that's been devoted to this project and to the canopy itself. There's firm pricing on all the scopes of the work right now that are remaining to be completed. And there are crews and consultants who are all mobilized and actively working on this project on a daily basis. And we do have a foundation in place in the ground right now that is ready to receive that canopy. That canopy could be landed on it tomorrow if it was ready to be delivered to the site.
So
And
Matt,
so, yes.
since you're here and you did the planning around the library and the circulation and how these kind of areas work together on a community planning basis, I wonder if you just want to step back and just spend a bit more time, because we have council here, and this isn't
Sure.
the only project that's on their plate for future considerations. So yeah, I just
Sure.
thought it would be good to step back and because that's where especially when we well, definitely with this project, and then when we looked at the library and how that might fit in why it was identified as being here, and how that fits into this vision of connecting these two really important amenities.
Absolutely. I think that any good city around the world that has good public space to it, and we've all been to them, they are fundamentally pedestrian-oriented public amenities that you can spend your entire day walking from one public amenity to another, whether it's a restaurant or a park or a plaza or a library or a waterfront. These things are, in any good city, they are connected through good pedestrian loops. And one of the things that the city has been prioritizing and working on is how do we in our city get this connection to the water, but also develop a sort of a pedestrian loop that is punctuated by nodes of public amenities. So things like the NDCC would be connected to the Pier, which would not be too far away from potentially a future library, which is easily connected to Touchstones and then to Baker Street. This loop that emerges, or this connection between downtown and the waterfront, and then back from the waterfront back up to downtown, is something that the city has rightfully prioritized and has been working on for a very long time, because those are real features in our city that so far have remained somewhat disparate. And by working on those connections, by creating this sort of critical mass of public spaces, we can get away from the constant east-west up and down Baker Street that seems to have defined the city of Nelson for many, many years, is this walk in the east-west direction up and down Baker Street, and then you're done. Maybe you'll pop down and see Touchstones and then come back up. The goal here is to bring people from Baker Street down to the waterfront, and vice versa, from the waterfront back up to Baker Street. And not only something that we can think of in a contemporary way, but the historic use of that site very much reflected that. That site was a place where people were getting off steam wheelers, wrong word, sorry, getting onto the train or going up by horse and buggy up to the Hume. It was a hub of activity down on that site that connected people between the water and our downtown. And so not only are we trying to do it in a modern way now, but it ties very much into the historic use of that site and how it was used to connect our lake to our downtown core. Is there anything else you wanted me to address there, Kevin, or is that?
No, you have Councillor Lautenberg here, but, or maybe a couple others. Yeah, I just thought it was important since we have especially new council here.
Matt,
Okay.
I understand the logic there about drawing people from east-west of Baker Street. Is there not some sort of zero sum here? Like, it sounds like what you're arguing is that we're going to have more people. Because if part of what attracts people to Baker Street is its liveliness, if you then sort of spread that that intensity out, does it not run the risk of sort of diminishing Baker Street somewhat? I just want to understand what the logic or the research here that are we gonna you're saying, if I'm understanding, is that there's going to be more people. The whole is greater than the sum of the.
Not necessarily. What I'm saying is that when we have amenities, there's more reason for people to visit the area because there's more to do at different times of day. In morning, afternoon, evening, different times of the year, different times of the week. When there's more amenity in the area, there is more reason for people to stay longer, for example, or to come back again, for example. I'm not necessarily citing studies saying that there's going to be more people, but that there is now a sort of a mass of public amenity that is connecting our Baker Street down to our waterfront. And this isn't something that I'm saying. These are city planning policies that have been in place for a long time, is how do we connect these amazing amenities that we have in this city that up until just very recently have been very separated from each other with the way that train tracks work or traffic works and all those kinds of things. And the fact that there's less amenity there's not a lot of reason for people to go down if the pier is old and falling apart, for example. So I'm not saying there's sort of studies showing there's going to be more people. It's about linking the amenities that we have within the city.
And you're interpreting existing planning documents around that vision, and that underneath that is the assumption that there will be more people. Like, you're not going to be pulling from and diminishing Baker Street, but that either there'd be more tourists or more people leave their home and walk and enjoy downtown and just spend more time in the area.
Yeah, and I think, all the planning document, we have people that come to our community that never get to the waterfront. They're just on Baker Street. So, there's this other whole amenity,
So
part
they'll
of
stay
that
longer.
was they would stay longer, right?
Yeah,
They spend 3 days here instead of 2 days or 1 day, right?
Councillor Payne.
Hi. Nice to meet you, Matt, virtually
Nice
at
to meet you
least.
too.
I'm
Yeah.
trying to understand if this is a good time to ask this question, because certainly as a citizen of Nelson, I have followed the development, what's happening on the Stores to Shores, I think was one of the names for this project. What I'm not understanding from, and maybe this direction came in later with Nelson Next or just all of our plans around active transportation, but I don't see that reflected anywhere on here. So it seems, especially the Hull Street corridor straight down, is for able-bodied pedestrians or vehicles. And the other thing that I think is interesting is how are we tying our active transportation in? Because it doesn't flow through our, our bike route right now. Is that, because there's that alternative, what I would call the alternative bike route through the park along the waterfront So will that, as we move forward, somehow be tied in, again, to get from shores to stores?
It's a highway.
Yeah.
That road is provincial, right? Isn't it the highway?
No, I get
Yeah.
that, but
We
you know,
we
if
do
we're
work
coming
with them,
straight
so.
up Hall Street, so e-bike can make
Yep.
it. I don't know if anybody else in this room can ride that hill. It'd be dicey for me, but, so I'm just wondering where that was in the consideration of the project. Those are just the first two things I pop into. I think it's great drawing people down there. I'm a little confused about the farmer's market thing, but I can see so many evening activities happening down
Absolutely.
there that would just be really awesome, as you say, to draw people after the shopping day down to continue their experience of Nelson with the arts and culture community and, you know, sporting and recreation and all of those things. So I think that's brilliant and I love it. But where are we with how
So
do
I
we
can-
better move people around? Sorry.
Yeah, I can speak to, and Mayor Morrison will recall this debate at council at the time. There was dedicated bike lanes identified in the plan.
Yeah.
There was pushback from the businesses in that area, and council at the time eliminated the dedicated bike lanes.
So Hall Street Baker to Front, there were.
If you come up from Lakeside Drive there, through that interchange, there was dedicated cycling lanes. There was a dedicated lane at the traffic lights, so that would give pedestrians priority. And again, we had a lot of pushback from the business community that we're taking away parking, and that was changed to have parking and not cycling.
Okay,
That wasn't us.
I didn't think so.
You bring up a really great point. The cities evolve, and as one piece is built, maybe something begins to make a little more sense, right? And those conversations might be worth revisiting once the Hall Street Pier and the canopy and the Ladybird and the swimming area are there, and we're inviting families there. Does it make sense to revisit the discussion around, as you said, active transportation, how important that is? How are we getting people to the space? In terms of abled bodies versus non-abled bodies, I will let you know we did have a consultant review the designs and provide input in terms of accessible design criteria for the project, so that we are considering that we want people of all ages and all mobility and all sort of abilities to be visiting. We don't want it to be an exclusive space at all.
Councillor Page?
I think for the most part, the vision is strong in terms of these quarters. I think this is a lot of it's set and it's being built, so there's not the conversation really here. We're getting a refresher for what I'm anticipating is going to be an ask coming down the pipe to fund the canopy portion and to ensure that we all understand the importance of the canopy portion to the grander vision. One of the things I'm looking at within the context of the transportation budget, we've had discussions about, especially having this nice grade walk that goes around through points 5 and 6 around City Hall and out to Touchstones, if you were to be in a wheel of some sort, is how we start to enrichen that streetscape, especially when it comes to maybe sacrificing some parking stalls, putting into places where some proper trees can go in. I'm not sure how that interfaces with Modi or what their thoughts and considerations are, but it is quite a derelict turn, and so I'm interested in what creative solutions are available to us to not have it be that kind of streetscape experience, because that's what's going to draw you from here to take a right-hand turn and come up to City Hall and go past the courthouse. You go down Hall Street because it's immediately more inviting, because it's just dusty and flat roofs and no stores open out onto that highway for all the same reasons, at least on the one side. So are there things we can do to thicken this up,
Yeah, I think
beautify?
as you're aware that Matt Kuziak does have some design skills and has, for example, on Lake Street, when we did the sidewalks there, there was designed to include some green space, some trees, etc. on that section of Lake Street, and that was designed by Matt, and so yeah, we could.
Not by me.
Yeah,
A different Matt?
internally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yes.
So yeah, we can certainly look at that. There's obviously highways all throughout British Columbia that are people's downtowns, etc., where there's been improvements made to to reflect the community. So you have to have it is a highway, so they have to buy into that. But I think
So-
they're in our building. They have certainly supported us. For example, the four-way stop. We are working with them in terms of how do we make that an attractive place as a gateway into Railtown. So I would say they're quite willing to work with us on that. And I agree. You go around that corner. We did some plantings on Hall and Front Street there, and then all of a sudden we stop, and then it's into weeds. So
So supplemental to that, and I think this ship is essentially we're too far down the construction portion, I think, to do much. But I'm going to ask the question anyway. When we look at the prevalence of the parking component leading into and around the Lady Bird, do we need to have that level of asphalt and parking in that area, or can we prioritize, especially as we get very close to the pier, and having so much parking in that area, more green space, more amenity space?
Yeah, again, this was a concern raised by the businesses and others in that area about parking. So the marching orders at that time was to get as much parking into that parking lot as possible, which is why the design is the way it is. It was also meant to be flex spaces. So when if you had an event, all that parking turns into place where you could have food trucks or whatever, or space for vendors or all that. So it was designed multi-purpose, but it certainly was designed to maximize parking. I think we basically lost some parking. I can't remember where, but we basically said we would at least have as much parking as we had before. That was the agreement, and as Matt pointed out, certainly that can be revisited. I don't know about changes of pulling up parking at this stage. You can obviously do anything. I think it does create, it's the way into, the boathouses or et cetera are at the, at the end of that road. So
They're fine. They're covered. They got their parking.
no, I meant in terms of access, right?
Access.
So at the end of it, that kind of has to be paved, I think. Anyway, that's just the history. That was the, there was
You're talking the marina or the boathouses?
the
boathouses.
the boathouses.
The yacht club, I think.
Yeah,
it's
and I'm most concerned about the stuff that's closest to where the canopy would be installed, right? As we get right up against the Prestige, it's just you got the full
okay.
parking lot, and then you still have even more parking up
Right.
along the Prestige, and
Does
So
that
that
parking
was-
not belong to the Prestige?
No,
Where does the
that's,
parking end for them?
that's- no, that is their lands.
is it?
Yeah, so the parking alongside the buildings are their lands.
Okay.
The road to, kind of the road to get there was our lands, and that was basically the agreement we negotiated with them is we wouldn't cut off their parking. They would allow us to turn it into flex space that could be used for
Okay.
events.
Thank you. That's good.
And Councillor Page, I'm not trying to defend a parking lot. It would be great to have more green space or another gateway into the canopy and the Lady Bird and the pier. As a person who has been going to the site multiple times over the past year and a half, And I often go down on my e-bike, and Colin Innes can tell you this. As far as parking lots go and access to the site for somebody either walking, and I have walked there before, or on an e-bike, it actually is okay. Like it's relatively user friendly once you enter into that parking area. There's some nice design features that keep people driving slow. There's decent paving and lighting and circulation, clearly defined circulation. And so it's not like you're sort of coming into the Walmart parking lot, for example, and then having to navigate your way to this pier. That parking lot, in terms of how parking lots go, is actually okay in terms of a pedestrian and a bicycle experience arriving to the site.
Oh, fair enough, thank you.
Councillor Tate has a question, and then Councillor Lockenberg.
Nice to meet you, Matt. I think I
Nice
missed.
to meet you too.
Who do you work for?
Himself.
I am the principal architect for Stanley Office of Architecture.
Oh, okay, so you're the architect. Because I'm just looking, I see
Yes.
Unitech and North Mountain. I'm just trying to figure out how everybody lands. Just
If
helping
you
me
see
understand.
SOA on there, it's that's the name of my architectural firm.
Oh, thank you very much. So I don't know if there's any more recent document than from October 25th, and maybe our CAO can help me. But on this agenda, there was redesign work happening on the canopy, like reducing the length and reducing the height and simplification of the geometry, etc.
Yes.
Is that reflected in
Right.
these pictures you've given us?
And so these are artistic impressions of what is going to happen at the pier. Some of them are, let's see, okay, I can sort of see what you're looking at. That process has happened, and we have firm pricing on all of the revised canopy design, and it has been engineered and drawn and priced,
Okay.
and effectively POs are ready to be issued if and when the city would be ready to issue them. In terms of the graphics, the third image, which is a somewhat abstracted version of the entire pier, that is sort of the white and blue line drawing. Are you looking at that right now?
I can, yes, the white and
third
blue
sheet.
with the red sailboat and the red
That
humans.
one, yeah. So that, while it's abstracted because it's a simple line drawing, that is the revised geometry and the revised size of the canopy. It's really quite nice. In fact, it relates. Previously, there was a much larger canopy there. That made sense when there was a longer pier. And there was a period in this project where the pier was reduced in length and we introduced the swimming area. And now the smaller canopy actually makes more sense with the scale of the project and the scale of the adjacent hotel. So that is an abstracted version of that canopy. The rendering that is underneath the canopy with the people that look a bit like shadows and they're pointing at sailboats. This is an artistic impression of what it would feel like underneath the canopy, and it's not too far off of what that would feel like, but that is an old rendering based on the old design. And so the revised design basically scaled things down a bit and simplified the internal steel structure. The primary structural members that are then all clad in this wood slat that lets light through and glows at night. It's the inner guts that were simplified to bring down the cost and size of the canopy. And that is, I pulled back from providing you guys with all the technical drawings of the canopy as it's been revised, but it's a good question.
Thanks very much. And a follow-up on just the updated design. I love that you said glows at night, because I was going to ask about the electrification and such things for these possible evening events that we could have. Is it intended that you could set up live music in there? Is that part of it?
Absolutely.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. Music has always been part of it. The lighting of it has always been part of it. At night, this thing will glow. The very last image, while that is based on an older rendering, I've kind of cropped out parts of the canopy that are a little less applicable. The intention there was to show the effect at night and how the lighting will work and how it will reflect in the water. And the idea is that you will see this from Big Orange Bridge. When you're driving across the Big Orange Bridge, you will see this beautiful glowing canopy. You'll see it from across the lake, and you'll see it from our downtown, and you'll see it from on the water.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to express a little bit of caution here about the canopy in particular. One, not particularly keen on the light. I mean, it itself will look attractive, but I don't like the idea of light pollution. I mean, part of what I can imagine is walking there and just enjoying the night sky, and having the canopy wreck some of that isn't particularly attractive a vision for me. The other thing is, just in terms of timing of this, from what I'm hearing, you could drop the canopy directly onto the footings or whatever have been established. So in terms of the argument about having a crew there ready to go is not really relevant at this point, because it would have to get built. The crew is probably going to finish and move on and then come back to just drop the canopy on. So we're not the timing issue around let's get this thing installed while we still have work being done down there. That's not, if I'm understanding, that's not particularly true, is it?
There is a link,
It's
actually.
very true.
Yeah.
A huge component.
Yeah, Councillor Lautenberg, one of the things in sequencing is there's a whole bunch of electrical work that has to occur in the canopy, and there's other electrical work that has to occur, and so part of if you did this together, we're able to sequence all that package of work together, because otherwise you're going to have to do the electrical work that we need to do this year. Everyone's going to leave the site, then we got to bring people back, and you've got to reinstall or install the lights and make all those connections. With the cladding on the canopy, we've got a construction company that's engaged right now in doing the boards and everything on the pier and bringing all that together. Again, they have to clad this after it's arrived on site, and so again, if we're able to sequence that with them being there, then we're able to bring all this work together. Otherwise, we're going to have to bring somebody back later to do this. What Matthew was referencing with the foundations are in place, and that is a huge component of this. But you still have to bring that steel onto site, get it put into place, bolt it all together, and then work with the cladding and all of the electrical work. And so there is quite a bit of work that actually goes, as opposed to, as being as simple sounding, I guess, is just, we've got the footing there, we'll just drop the canopy on, tighten up some bolts, and away we go. There's actually quite a bit of work that all sequences in together. And so one of the things that we're, I guess, advocating for from a project perspective is that if you're able to sequence these things together, you can be kind of efficient with the teams of people you have and have them there once, whereas if we're having to come back again, then that's really having to set up another project, and it would have to essentially function as another complete project for us to be doing this, as opposed to sequencing with doing the floating docks, the railings that need to go on there, and the lighting componentry that needs to get put into place. We also have glazings coming for the Ladybird building. And then there's all the HVAC and electrical work that goes along with that as well. So there is actually quite a bit of integration that still occurs with this, even though we are set with footings to be able to put the canopy superstructure on that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And it does bring up, part of the discussion today is I wanted to communicate that we are pleased to see a commitment in 2024 for canopy. But as Colin was saying, that there are efficiencies that would happen by completing that scope of work at the same time as the project, and there's risks that would be avoided. And so by going to a 2024, or by deferring scopes of the project to a later time, one of the primary risks is price certainty. Right now, we have price certainty on all of the major components of the work. If we defer that to 2024, we no longer have that price certainty. People's prices are no longer valid, and the parts of that project have to go out and effectively be retendered. And so by deferring parts of the scope of the work or the canopy to 2024, you're opening up the risk of price escalation and price uncertainty. Whereas right now we have certain prices, and as I said, if the city was prepared to issue POs for major scopes of the steel and the cladding, they are ready to go with certain prices. The other one is what you were already talking about, which is mobilization and demobilization, and Colin addressed it, but it's not only just the trades on site, it's the entire project team, which includes consultants, Colin himself, and everybody. When we defer parts of the project to another year, we have a demobilization process that is needed and then a remobilization process that is needed. And that has real tangible effects on the cost and timeline of a project. And so that it does have a real impact to the overall sort of cost of these things when we defer a scope of the work to another year. So I'm glad you brought that up, though.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I have a follow-up, but I can wait.
Oh, do you follow up, and then we'll have Councillor Payne.
Okay. I just want to express first ask the question, did we commit to the funding last year for the canopy, or is that coming forward still?
You know, this budget has been moving with, obviously with, the supply chains, the inflation, et cetera. I think we initially had hoped it would be in that, in that original budget, and really, once we got prices in and costs in, that we just didn't have the funding to complete the whole project. So yes, it was in. Yes, it was in a budget, but we were not able to deliver, the project with the canopies in with that budget that council ultimately approved for this project, and that's why it's back here is because we have a funding shortfall now. There's 894. Is that what we need here?
For the canopies, yeah.
894,000.
350?
460?
360.
Or, pardon?
For just the canopies piece, I think was,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
360.
360 is what
Yeah.
it was, yeah.
We're at 8.
Yeah.
What are we at?
I think it was 821 or something
Yeah.
like that. Where are we
And
here?
821 is what? Just the canopy now?
It's for next year here.
Yeah.
Well, that includes cost of the canopy as well as the work to mobilize people there, some consultant work that would need to occur if we do it separately. Yeah.
Well, just keeping the construction management going through the canopy process.
Process.
That's the additional cost that would be for the canopy. I'm trying to find the parks piece here, sorry.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, we can clarify that, but, yeah, so that's the history. We've been struggling with this
860.
canopy for a while. It's we had originally put in an allowance till we came up with a design and costing. Once we did that, then it was significantly over budget, and so then we went back to the consultants to say, yeah, you're way over our budget. What can we do to bring that cost down? Similar as you recall, the process to bring the cost of the core Pier down and changing that design. So we've been working hard to try to manage this cost. We've experienced things, for example, we had to raise the whole deck of that pier because of the new
Flooding level.
potential flood levels. So we had to lift it 2 or 3 feet or something from the original one. So all those things have kind of come into play. And anytime you have something in the water, as you know, we had that problem with the just
Piles.
yeah, placing the piles where once they started pounding those or did some testing or whatever, they found that the lake bed underneath wasn't what we thought it was, and they had to go in much deeper. So obviously that's more steel and more pilings and et cetera, et cetera. So any of these projects that are on the waterfront are challenging. And you know, we originally kind of looked at this as working with what we had and enhancing that, and council made the decision to pull out the old wooden piles that are creosote and put in new steel piles to have a long-term life of this. So there was a number of factors that came into play at the end of the day that pushed the project and really, I guess, pushed the the canopy out. It was the only flex. The only reason the canopies is the item. It was the flex item. That was the only piece that we couldn't do. We could potentially delay. The rest was kind of all in play, and it kind of got pushed out the end of the funding stream. So that's kind of the history, especially for those that weren't here through the whole thing. But yeah, but I don't think we ever anticipated building a whole new pier, which is what we did. There's nothing in that old pier there anymore. All the pilings are new, all the structures new. We've lifted it, we've expanded it, we have a new pier. We built a new pier.
It's wider, yes.
So I just wanted to be clear, kind of reacting to what Matt was saying there about he was thanking us for including the canopy in the budget. We haven't yet. There's a
haven't approved that
proposal, and we're going to go through a process. And I, for one, I like the design. But when I weigh that against every party, I don't know yet. Like if I'm supportive. So I just want to caution a little bit, hearing everything about the urgency as well as the vision. Just a little bit of caution.
Yeah, maybe Matt and Colin, we can tease out what the premium that we're estimating for 2024 versus carrying on. I think that's important. Is it 200,000 that you're going to look at? Part of the reason we pushed it to 2024 was, could we go out and get more grants? The grants, if we can't get more than 200,000, we're spending more 200,000 to delay it to get grants. We're net negative probably. So I think those are the pieces that we want to look at. And Colin's right in terms, it was designed, all that lighting, etc. It was all designed with the canopy in place. So now you're having to kind of temporarily change your lighting scheme to make something work in the interim. And if the vision is, that the canopy is going to be part of this project, doing those kind of Band-Aid solutions in the interim may not be the best solution. And, we've got quite a few grants for this project. Certainly CBT is not funding more of it. We got funding from the feds and the province. I'd say this is one that I think we'd be better off looking for grants for other projects than trying to come back to this one. I'd say it's probably a bit of a, unless we just happen to get lucky and someone had a granting process that just fit this project at the right time. I think it would be worthwhile maybe going back to the CBT and saying, this project became much bigger than we anticipated. Certainly the city has funded it to a significantly higher level than was anticipated when we applied for those grants. Having a quick conversation with them to see if there's any interest at all in funding this. They stretched when they first funded. They funded 500,000 at the beginning, so that's a big. Generally for the grants they fund is quite large. So that's rambling a bit, but those are all the pieces I think we need to kick around and because at the end of the day, we're hoping to deliver the best value to the community, and us, we may not do that if we, kind of change course. But I think looking at that and analyzing that and having some good thought around that is and really, you're hearing from Matthew today and Colin and that the canopy was a very important part of the whole concept for this amenity, and And to not have a canopy, you're 3/4, you built your house and didn't put the decks on it.
Yeah, and Kevin, it's an important point. Not only is it critical to the success of the project, but it's also critical to the funding, to the grant, the provincial grant money that the city is getting for this project. Part of the vision and part of the grant is directly tied to that canopy. And so it's not a matter of just saying, well, we won't put a canopy in there and save a bit of money. There's major repercussions or discussions that will open up to say, well, we're just not going to do the canopy. Not only does that impact the possible success of the project that the city has already invested in, but it's also going to impact the funding money.
And Matthew, in terms of timing, if we don't want to delay this and then end up incurring a whole bunch of other costs. So you said you had firm pricing. When's that firm pricing good to? When do we have to make a decision on that?
What is the firm pricing?
Well, my understanding, Kevin, is that we've got pricing, and actually some of the pricing's being held at the moment. So yeah, I would think that, I mean, if we want to really give it some good consideration, I can certainly understand this is not a small consideration, but I don't think that our pricing that we'll be able to hold it for, I mean, we can probably hold it for a couple more weeks, but that would be really the vendor could retract their pricing if they so decided.
Sorry, my turn.
Go.
Well, I'm gonna try to take a shot at this. No, I just wanna know, Chris, could you tell us, do we have some reserve fund somewhere to cover this? I just sort of feel like we're kind of talking about budgets and then we're having this update on this and it's like, this isn't like a budget line. I mean, like, do we have some reserves somewhere to cover this, to get this project completed?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can definitely take a look at that and kind of, I mean, there's reserves there. It's always just a case of priorities and how much we want to go into them. I understand we just got 96,000 more in our land sale reserve, so that's so there's
I have some
little
ideas for
pieces like that, and I can definitely bring something back to. And we were gonna, I think we have some comparisons to make between doing it now, delaying it a year, what that cost difference is. So I think we can provide a bit more information and a couple scenarios on what it would be if we funded it ourselves or if we delayed it a year and looked for some grants and help you make a better decision on that. But,
So
yeah.
what I'm hearing though is I'm hearing some urgency in terms of time. So do we have the staff that can turn their minds to answering these questions that have now been raised within the next 2 weeks? So you're asking for this. This is obviously a piece of business that has to be done by the city. So the next council meeting, like, you kind of run out of council meetings here to get to. If you're saying that vendors you can probably hold for 2 weeks. Well, we do have a council meeting within that time, but after that, you're another month out. It's not to say that we can't have a special meeting. We have these meetings like we're having now all the time that we can add a piece of business to. We could be adding a piece of business to today's meeting as far as that goes. But yeah, like, do we have the ability right now to do this other work? I'm personally, and I've always been of the mind that we've started this project, and it's just like everything else. I like to see projects finished. I have to say, and I'll be honest, and people know this, that most of the Hall Street development that went through, I wasn't particularly in favor of. But it's done, it's completed. A lot of people like it. There's probably a few people that don't like it. And it's just like, we all get to bring our opinion to the table. And we've had lots of discussion. The previous council had a lot of discussion, and we all had opinions about different parts of this project in the last 4 years. But at this point, I personally feel that we need to get this project completed so that we can get on with the other really important projects that we have coming. Even if this price stayed exactly the same and it was in 2024, the same question is, where are we getting the money? Unless we decide that this project is finished, which is a decision that could be made. Is this project finished? If it is, no canopy, don't bring it back in 2024. But it's, like, if we bring it back in 2024, it's still the $1 million, or the whatever,
61.
861.
861. Adding inflation, it'll be $1 million in 2024.
Easily.
You know, so that's the question. Or do we spend this money now and then get on with the next big project we have? We have a huge legacy project in terms of the civic center that we have lots of grant money for. Same like this project. So, like, you gotta keep in mind how these projects work. So we got a lot of grant money here. The city had to come. Who knew that the economy was gonna fall off the rails and we were gonna have a pandemic? We've got a lot of grant money sitting both for towards the city as well as from the civic theater that is sitting. We have to utilize this money or else the donors start to ask for it back. You know, that's the next big project. We also know for that project to go through that we're looking at potentially borrowing, and we've just been talking about the borrowing bylaws, $5 million to make sure that we can get that project done. I mean, you can't start these things and tell everybody to, like, you know, go home and come back in a year. So it's just it's a cautionary tale in my mind. If we think that this project's over, then we'll have that motion in front of us at the next council meeting. And if we think this project is not over, then I think the only other decision to make is that we're gonna fund it.
And I think,
But, so there's my 2 cents, and then I'm just gonna go, it's Councillor Page, and then,
The other P, that would be me.
Councillor Payne, and then I believe, hey, you had your hand up.
We'll see.
Since I had this question, we have gone in a significantly deeper direction around the canopy, but I just am gonna take 60 seconds to talk about parking, which is my favorite thing, because I don't know when the opportunity will come again. I too, Matt, use this parking lot frequently. I go down there first thing in the morning and walk my dog on a fairly regular basis. For me, driving in, mainly my dog, because there isn't a lot of traffic, it is a safe parking lot. I cast my mind back 20 years and I walk from Baker Street down here, and I've got a double stroller and a toddler holding onto the side, and you want me to get through that parking lot from the sidewalk to the pier, it now becomes not a safe place for me. And then I'll cast myself forward 20 years and I'm in a mobility device, and I also need to get from the sidewalk through to the Lady Bird in my, whatever those things are called, chair. And again, how do I know someone's not backing out on me? Maybe they have flags on them. So I don't think it is a safe corridor without some sort of walkway, and I don't see that on here right now. I assume that's part of the project, but I want everyone to be able to safely get from Baker Street to the pier. That's it. I don't need any response to that. I just wanted to register that for an able-bodied person, that parking lot is completely navigable. But if I look at the family scenario where my toddler's holding onto the side of the double stroller and sees the ladybird and just goes, woo, I'm going for it, then it's challenging. That's it.
I'd just say, so the west side of that, I think it's the west side of that parking lot, if you're on the west side of the sidewalk coming along Hall Street, there's sidewalks all the way to the, to where the
To the entrance of the parking lot.
No, it goes right through.
All the way along the
side of the,
airport fence.
beside the fence.
That's by the airport,
Yeah.
aerodrome.
Yeah.
The west side.
So
Just
don't
along
go
the
around
fence
side.
by the,
On the airport side.
yeah, there's
Okay.
there's
No, I
sidewalk
have
all along
gone
there.
down that sidewalk. I didn't,
That was
I
an
guess if you
asphalt.
feel it's wide enough to be navigable by, okay, then I will rescind, and once all of the construction
Now
Yeah.
you can see it again.
things
That'd
are
be nice.
gone, that I will once again recognize it. I'm not sure how long it's been there before that happened, but maybe because I do drive in. So yeah, as long as, and bike traffic, we're just gonna assume is gonna safely navigate through that.
Well, either side they can
Okay, okay.
get in. Yeah.
That was it. I really
okay.
just think we need to have that view. We always talk about all ages, all abilities, but then, yeah, and that abilities part for me is really critical.
Counselor, you okay? Counselor Payne? No, I don't, no, yeah, I just wanna make sure that you didn't have a second.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I just wanted to quickly make sure.
Oh, what? Okay, everybody's handing up the name tags.
No, I just wanted to remind you what mine was.
Oh, okay.
Maybe we should have
So
buttons
Counselor
that lights
Tate,
go on.
and then we'll have Counselor Page.
So I'm new, so I'm just getting clarity. On October 25th, we saved $360,000 by not building the canopy in 2022. We have in our predicted possible budget for 2024, $860,000. And we are going to get a number of what it would be if we did it in 2023? Is that where we're at right now? We've asked for that?
I think that number is what we would do in 2023. I don't know that I hadn't factored in any additional costs that Matt Stanley was mentioning for delaying that for a year. So that's,
860.
I've portioned out the part of the budget that was for the canopies and slotted that into 2024.
Yeah.
If we were gonna delay and if there were some additional costs in doing that, then that would be on top of that.
So it looks like 860 to do it in 2023.
Correct.
Thank you.
And just to clarify, the 360 was an allowance. We hadn't
Yes.
we didn't have the design. That was the estimate at the time. So it wasn't a firm price or based on a firm design. It was just an allowance that we were carrying for the canopies.
Thank you.
Counselor Page.
In an order of magnitude sense, what do we expect the parking revenue would be if we activate Airport Road? We always talk about it.
Put an awful lot of parking along there.
Have this conversation all the time about charging for parking down there.
You don't know how many spots you could fit in there and
Oh, it's 30.
Yeah, I'm counting right now, and there's probably 40 plus.
Depends if there's snow or not, though, because the snow gets piled in places as well.
Yeah.
But
And it
that could
gets
be
used
changed.
more in the winter, does it not, for people heli skiing? No? No more in the summer? Okay, my bad.
It's,
It's always
Always very busy.
It's
down
always-
there.
anecdotal evidence.
yeah,
I'm there
no,
at
it's
the
just
wrong
like I
time.
drive down there during when I drive down to RDCK meetings, there's no place to park, doesn't matter what
Time of year.
month
yeah.
of the year it is that you go down there. And these guys drive to
Charge
park,
extra
to
down
power
there.
work to,
$3 an hour.
I'd say 100,000.
There you go.
Okay. I just have one other question. Sorry. So when I look at this lovely, big, beautiful legacy project, I think about the ponds in Castlegar and how they're like they get so much extra funding for beautiful things from Selgar, I was going to say, but I might say it wrong.
oh,
Selkirk's,
Mercer.
right?
So, yeah.
Mercer, yeah.
Mercer Selgar.
Mercer, Selgar, thank you. Is there an opportunity to ask our people, our business
Have it.
community?
We don't have
our
a
people are
Mercer
Hydro.
Selgar or a Tech Minco.
I
So
know.
that's always the drawback here because
Yeah.
basically our biggest entities are all public biggest entities. I don't think Selkirk College is gonna fund it. I don't think the province of British Columbia is gonna fund it because they're already funding it probably in other ways.
I'm picturing like little
Yeah,
metal
plaques,
plaques
yeah.
and that sort of thing. Is that just too wild?
We
that's how this
could
project
look at
started.
A
that.
lot of metal plaques.
Well, you're not going to fund the whole
No,
thing.
no, I know.
But you might get 50,000.
Call it the
Okay.
bald face canopy.
Thanks. It's actually what I was
Put a big logo on it.
Yeah.
Take it out of used
Woodworking,
snowboards.
it has the bald face face on
Reclaimed
it or
store.
something, Counselor Lockenberg? Yeah.
Okay, but I think Councillor Page just said to me, we've already gone down that road and I
It
apologize.
started with sponsorship. There was a
Okay.
big part of this. It started with the idea that it was going to be, Air was going to go
Klesnikov.
find
Yeah.
some lucrative sponsorship opportunities.
Okay, thank you.
So, yeah, certainly we can look for other ways to fund it. I don't think we can award this assuming we're going to do that. We can come back, we can find this money
Yeah, let's
in
get back to
reserves.
this.
between the Community Works Fund and Capital Projects Reserve, we can make this happen. It's just,
to do
yeah.
it.
It's still,
I
an,
look at the
it's
community
still an
works.
opportunity cost. The money we spend here is not going to be spent somewhere else. So
Well, some of it's, for example, I look at the Community Works Fund, we're anticipating, in 2024, debt service of 325. That project's not gonna be completed by 2024. We're probably paying interest on short-term borrowing, so that's just gonna push that back. But you're right, we eventually have to pay for that, so.
Yeah, I would hurry up on activating the aerodrome road
Yeah,
and link those together until the servicing of the cost is completed. If we have to tie that up for nearly a decade, that makes it a more comfortable and a stronger linkage. And if
Well, and again,
that's for me where we'll go.
yeah. And
The
those could,
interim financing is
yeah.
Chris's job, and I'm sure we're fine. We're
So
good
we
for
can,
it.
so I think you heard from Chris and Colin that the 890 is
860.
2023, or 860 is 2023 number, and I agree with the mayor, it's probably $1 million by the time you have your construction manager, we're running 20% on that or something, right?
Are we still running 20%?
By the time you get overheads, mobilization, et cetera, getting your design consultants back for other meetings and more meetings, and I'd say you're spending 20% easy on those
You're
things.
saying 20% is in the 800 still?
It is in.
Yeah, it assumes that the project takes, whatever months additional to complete, but it doesn't assume, that they close down and then have to come back. Again,
Sure,
that could
yeah, fair
delay,
enough.
make
No,
it
no,
even longer.
I just wanted to make
Yep.
Cost, yeah.
Okay.
Plus, it's gonna take longer if you shut it down
Yep.
and kind of do a temporary fix and then undo a temporary fix, and so, yeah, I think order of magnitude, you're looking at, probably $1 million if you delay it. And are we gonna get 200,000 in grants between there? I don't think that's a stretch. So I agree with the mayor, either you're gonna do it or not.
Yeah.
And as
That makes sense to me too.
as Matthew said, there are some
it off
grants we'd
stats
have to negotiate with the province that CBT is probably easier. They would recognize that we spent way more than we anticipated, but the province is a little, they just have more,
Less flexible.
less flexible, yes.
There's always that risk of some money having to go back that we've already
Save money.
spent, so.
Okay.
Anybody, Counselor Page?
Oh, I have nothing.
No.
Nope, we're good
So I don't.
till this
I-
comes for decision.
So obviously, we're not making a decision here, today. We're missing 2 counselors, not that we don't have quorum to make a decision. But, do I hear, any kind of position that this comes forward to the next business meeting, which would be, somebody give me a date?
Would you like a motion to refer to the 14th? Is that what you're asking for? Because yes, motion to refer to the 14th.
Does this require a decision of council?
Yes, I think it does.
Yeah,
It does.
we don't have this in the current financial plan. You haven't adopted a new financial plan, so you're gonna have to,
Yeah, okay,
we can't spend unless it's in the financial plan.
yeah, good.
Is there a seconder for?
Yeah,
motion
so
to
unless you're
refer?
prepared to
Should we want to do it now?
do it now, otherwise we put it on the agenda for the, February the 14th, whether or not we'll have any more new information back by that time. But I'm sure staff will now, that gives them, gosh, this is February the 3rd.
Today,
So
yeah.
you've got 11 days to work some kind of magic based on what some of the asks have been or considerations to have at that meeting. And I think that,
Second the motion.
so there's been a motion on the table to refer a decision about adding to the, about the completion of the
Pier project.
Heritage, the Hall Street Pier project. It's been moved and seconded. All,
I just asked, are we specifically saying the 14th? Because you did say we're thinking of
could
having
call
a
a
meeting on the
special.
10th. If you're ready then.
yeah, well, we could have it on
We under that
the
kind of time pressure?
10th. That's even more time pressure for,
Well, I just keep it
Well-
open, that it doesn't, that we bring this back to
yeah,
a
well, I mean,
future
we would
council
have the,
meeting.
yeah, the 10th or the 14th.
I'm happy to If that's a friendly amendment, it's a motion to
Yeah,
refer
so I mean,
to
it's just a motion of
to a
referral.
future February meeting.
Yep.
And
I don't need to put a time restraint on it. You guys know what you need.
And just to give us some direction, what would you like to see there is just the difference in price estimated, whether doing it in 2024 versus getting it done in 2023. That type of thing.
And how we'd fund it.
Yeah,
Okay.
and how
And how we fund it.
And the cost of the grantors if we don't proceed, what
Yeah,
is that
the
gonna,
grant dependent
what's the
on
negative
canopy.
repercussion gonna be?
Yeah.
Impact on funding.
Grant funding specifically on that one.
I wrote it
Whether or
down.
not the lights are gonna dim at like 11:30 slowly until midnight, so they're off
Yeah.
for dark sky compliance.
Dark sky compliance, let's go with
Yeah,
that.
just waiting for them to finish there.
I know.
Yeah.
I thought we'd just put a light
there's,
switch on for
you know.
Councillor Lautenberg.
Yeah, yes. You go, oh man, that goes a long way to getting my vote. If I can walk in and just turn it off.
Or turn it on only.
It's fun for the kids. Make it a big switch.
Yeah.
Kids love a switch.
Get everybody on bicycles.
How much extra for a switch?
So does staff feel like we've given them enough information to go away, and hopefully it's not so much that it's not into the minutia of weeds, but that
Yeah.
I think that, where does the funding, where does the 860 come from now? I think is one question. I think the other question is,
How do we replenish
what
it?
does 860 look like in 2024?
Yeah.
And then the council will decide whether or not this project has ended or this project continues. That's not your decision to have to make, that's our decision to have to make. Okay,
Motion on the
there's
table.
been a motion on the table, the motion's been, any further comment on referral? Councillor Pate?
No.
No. Okay. The motion is for referral. All those in favor of referral? And opposed, that carries. Matt, I don't know where you are.
I'm here.
Okay, oh, there you are.
I'm in my
Okay.
studio.
As
I wanted to be there in person, but
yeah, no,
had to be in my studio today.
that's fine. So there you go. So there's a bit more work in front of all of us to think about this project. But thank you for coming in and reminding us of the plan and the sort
Anytime.
of bigger vision of the whole, pedestrian loop as we sort of try to move around a very up and downhill town, which is fraught with its own challenges for sure. But anyways, thank you again for your time, and I'm sure that Chris and Colin will be in touch with you in short order.
Okay, sounds good. And I'm happy to join any of these meetings to
Yeah, if we need
speak
to,
about the vision and the design goals at any time.
if we need to bring you back again, we sure will.
Okay,
Okay.
Thanks, Matt.
thank you very much. Yeah, bye.
Okay, so counselors, we are at 4:15, and seeing nobody putting up their hand for anything else, item number 6 on the agenda is,
Wait, I'm sorry.
okay, somebody did put their hand up, Counselor.
I don't have a meeting on my schedule for the 10th. Did you guys just mention something about the 10th?
Yeah, I'm looking at the amount of stuff we have going on. We might need to have a Friday after. We weren't gonna have the 10th, and we were doing more budget on the 17th, but there are a number of, there's at least one fairly significant in-camera item that has to be dealt with.
Okay.
So instead of either starting at like noon on a Tuesday, which excludes Councillor Woodward and potentially Councillor Tate and Councillor Pinero from being able to attend, I've gone with a Friday afternoon so that we can keep council meetings within a reasonable length of time, because starting at 1 or 2 and ending at 10 or 10:30 is not comfortable for either the councillors or for staff who on council days do come to work at their regular scheduled hours. They don't start midday just because we're going half the night, so that was a decision I
Okay.
made as mayor.
Yep, just need some clarity on that. I was just about to book some time away, but I couldn't get back for noon is what you're talking about.
And that's just, there's a lot of stuff and there's a lot of budget.
Get it.
and
I'm happy to be
unfortunately,
here.
Having to schedule in a few
Just
more
need to know.
meetings is, we need to be sane when we're having these meetings, so,
And rested.
yeah. So you can all pencil in February the 10th. We'll probably start, somebody will let you know whether or not it's gonna be at noon start or 1 o'clock start. I'm
Okay.
hoping that it'll only be a couple of hours.
Okay.
Sounds like there's a few more things we could add today. Okay, so, adjournment's been moved. Nope, okay, adjournment, move, please. Moved by Payne, seconded by Lockenberg. All those in favor? Oh, thank you, good, I was almost thinking that we didn't have. That's, nobody's opposed, so that's carried. Thank you to city staff for attending today and